All right, welcome. It is the NH&RA annual meeting. I've been thinking a lot about how much the world has changed over the last year and really what a difference a year makes. So 53 weeks ago to the day, NH&RA was convening our 2020 annual meeting in Palm Beach. The nation was just beginning to wake up to the fact that maybe this COVID-19 thing might be a bit worrisome. Our staff, as we were getting ready for this meeting, out of an abundance of caution, decided that we would put out some hand sanitizer at the registration desk just to make sure we were, doing our part. But otherwise, it was business as usual last year. Little did we know that in less than 3 weeks, we'd all be scrambling to buy masks, adopt social distancing protocols, implement work from home technology, and revisit pretty much every aspect of the work we do in construction and property management and finance, HR, the works. 1 year later, our association and I think our industry has really proved to be remarkably resilient. We were nimble in our response and effective in our advocacy. 2020 was a challenging year, but not a lost year for affordable housing policy or production. And now, at long last, it's beginning to feel like there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Spring's around the corner. It's actually a warm day here in the DC area for once. There are 3 vaccines now in distribution. And just this week, President Biden announced that there would be enough supply of that vaccine to potentially vaccinate the entire adult population as soon as May. So we stand poised, I think, as a collective industry with shovel-ready projects to help lead the country out of recession. And it's a good thing, too, because Americans around the country have suffered this year. Many have lost their jobs and seen their savings wiped out as a result of the pandemic. And the need for affordable housing and its role as a part of the critical health infrastructure of this country, I think, is all the more obvious to the country at large. Things, of course, won't be returning to the pre-pandemic normal in 2021, and maybe not ever. Over the next year, we'll be grappling with major structural issues that will have long-term implications on the real estate industry generally and affordable housing development, finance, and operations specifically. I was thinking about all the unknown questions that are still out there that we're grappling with. Where and how will people work next year? And how will that impact demand for housing, and in which markets? Will commercial real estate demand be reduced by virtual offices? Or will we be shifting to lower density solutions in the future as people decide they don't want to return to density and smaller spaces? And what are the costs that will be embedded in that change if that's what happens? What sectors of the economy will recover and how quickly? And how will that impact our affordable housing residents? What role will volatility play in the financial markets, and how will this impact land prices, building valuations, interest rates, and just overall liquidity? How will the Biden administration's approach to immigration impact labor forces, and in particular construction? How will developers and architects rethink building design and density to better control for the health of its building occupants? How will the rapid acceleration of technology adoption change our workflows? How will the principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion inform the future of our respective organizations and the people we serve? We're going to be exploring all of these dynamics and these questions and many more over the course of the next 3 days and throughout the year 2021. NH&RA, I think, is in a position to provide insight and leadership in the affordable housing world, in large part because it's an organization of strong leaders in the industry and leaders within our association. And one of the strongest leaders, our current board chair, Holly Wiedemann, president of AU Associates, is here to join me in our welcome session, and we'll be making some welcoming remarks. So Holly, bring us to order.
Thank you, Tom. Greetings and welcome to NH&RA's virtual annual meeting. I didn't want to say annual virtual meeting because we trust that we will be able to see each other again in person. I'm hoping that many of you have had, at the least, your first vaccine, and perhaps there are a number of you who have had both. The big news is that there's light at the end of the tunnel, and with all due hope, it's not an oncoming variant train. We've had to adapt over these past 12 months. The last time many of us saw each other, as Tom just said, was at our winter meeting at the breakers just before the world broke apart. We have survived a year fraught with uncertainty, change, and adaptation. Throughout all of this, our core team of fearless leaders, Peter and Tom, along with Caitlin, Brooke, et al., have continued to adapt and advance. Tom has led his team to be innovative, topical, resilient, and relevant in ways that have stretched our minds, helped our companies, comforted our employees, and helped us navigate on behalf of our residents. Tom will provide the statistics, but despite these circumstances, NH&RA has had its best membership and attendance year yet. This speaks to the relevance of our organization and the resilience of our members. We are considered essential workers, given our provision of housing. You can't be in this industry without grit and persistence. And I would say this year has absolutely been no exception. So without further ado, I'd like to call this meeting in process, and I give you back to Tom.
Thank you, Holly. Yes, so as Holly referenced, this has been a challenging year for our organization and our industry, but it has been a year of positive change for the association as well. I wanted to first and foremost thank all of our members for continuing to stand by us and to support us so that we can support you. And a particular special welcome to all of our new members this year. As Holly mentioned, this was a growth year for NH&RA, and I believe that a lot of that has to do with the great programming and services and outreach and advocacy that we've been doing as an organization, and we're certainly looking to build on that. Now, events like this are possible in large part because of the generous support of our members. So with that, I'd like to take a few minutes to thank in particular our sponsors, beginning with our 2021 annual meeting presenting sponsor, Bank of America.
On behalf of Bank of America, I would like to welcome each of you to NH&RA's annual meeting. We are proud to be this year's presenting sponsor for NH&RA, as well as the 2021 annual meeting. We are also honored to co-host the welcoming session with the NH&RA team. In this challenging year, I want to congratulate Tom and the NH&RA team for all they have done on behalf of the affordable housing industry. NH&RA has hosted so many informative sessions to share best practices and strategies during the health crisis. I am sure you found these sessions to be as helpful and informative as I did. At Bank of America, we have a long-standing commitment to using our resources to make the communities where we live, work, and play stronger, more sustainable, and more accessible. Our success is predicated upon important partnerships with organizations like NH&RA, and we are proud of our long record of support for their mission. The agenda over the next 3 days reflects NH&RA's commitment to advocacy for affordable housing at all levels, federal, state, and local. It's important to share our experiences and perspectives in order to ensure that we fulfill our collective responsibility to deliver safe, affordable housing to not only our most vulnerable, but to families and individuals working hard to make ends meet across the country. And I have no doubt that we are up for the challenge. With NH&RA's support and leadership, the annual meeting provides a terrific opportunity to address the most important issues facing our industry. I look forward to spending time virtually with all of you this week and want to thank Tom and the NH&RA team for putting together another great event. I hope you all enjoy your time spent at the 2021 annual meeting.
Thank you, Maria, and to the Bank of America team. In addition to Bank of America, we're very grateful for the support of ProLink Solutions, who will be sponsoring our Developers Roundtable in a few minutes. Redstone Equity Partners will be sponsoring the Equity Roundtable tomorrow. Berkadia will be sponsoring the Tax Exempt Bond session Friday afternoon. And I hope that everybody will be joining us for a networking reception tomorrow afternoon as well, sponsored by Boston Financial Investment Management, where we'll be extending a lot of the day's conversation for some more informal discussion. Also wanted to make sure we thanked our conference patrons, Greystone, National Trust Community Investment Corporation, PGIM Real Estate, Walker & Dunlop, our media patrons, Affordable Housing Advisors, Ballard's Bar, Churchill Stateside Group, the Dominion Due Diligence Group, our conference book patron, Baker Tilly, and our sustaining sponsors, CBRE Affordable Housing, Sinair, Lumint, National Equity Fund, R4 Capital, and Stratford Capital Group. Without your support, this event wouldn't be possible, and the great activities of this organization wouldn't be possible as well. We have got a fantastic program planned for you over today and the next few days. As I mentioned, we'll be starting off with our Developers Roundtable in just a few minutes, followed up by a roundtable discussion with some housing finance agencies. We also added a bonus session at the end of the day today on contemplative-based resiliency and how it can be a tool to support your colleagues and yourself and other caregivers during this extended crisis. Tomorrow, we'll be starting at 1 Eastern again, and we'll be kicking off the conversation with discussions on tax credit equity, social impact investing, and a fantastic keynote speaker that will tie, I think, multiple aspects of that together. Friday will be our deep dive into bonds with 2 dedicated panels looking at various policy and transactional executions, followed with a closing keynote with Ethan Handelman, the newest Deputy Assistant Secretary for Multifamily at HUD. Of course, if you like this event, I hope that you'll consider joining us for some of our other events this spring. We have a couple of things coming right up after this, the NACAMA Spring Meeting on April 13th and 14th, as well as the NH&RA Spring Forum, which isn't on this slide, but on May 3rd and 4th. And we're continuing our town hall series, the Unmute the Mic series, throughout the spring and summer, starting with a historic tax credit equity and preservation discussion on March 18th. Discussions to follow that on April 22nd on multifamily construction, another mid-year check-in with the Developers Roundtable on May 20th, session looking at interesting gap sources and niche financing tools on May 27th, and a whole host of additional programs in the summer and going into the fall. Wanted to just share a couple of tips on how to make the most of this event. Virtual meetings are, of course, by nature different than in-person events. And we're certainly sad that we're not meeting in Naples as originally planned. But we have developed our program with a mind towards maximizing the impact of the virtual platform and hopefully making the best use of your days. Here are a few tips just to make sure you're making the most of the meeting. We have the ability to take questions, and we want to really encourage you to post them. Use the Q&A button in your Zoom toolbar, and we'll try to get to as many of those questions and comments throughout the meeting, and we'll be doing some follow-up for those that we don't get to. Also, please feel free to use the chat. We've got a great way to extend the conversation like we do at our actual in-person meetings by leveraging the chat tool. So as you hear things that you want to amplify or share or bring your experience into the conversation, please do share that in the chat. We'll also be doing a series of polls throughout some sessions and in between sessions. Please take a moment to complete them when you're prompted, and we'd certainly appreciate your feedback. But in addition to that, the polls are the auditing protocol for those of you who are seeking CPE and continuing education credit for this event. So if you want to get credit for the sessions, please make sure to fill out those polls. Holly mentioned a couple of our big achievements that we've had this year as an organization in terms of our overall participation and our membership. But we have a lot of really exciting priorities that we're excited about in 2021 as well. We're continuing to do extensive bond advocacy work at the state and federal level, and we'll be doubling down on that with the new resources that came in the year-end spending bill and the new challenges that brings with them. We're looking forward to continuing to work with Congress and the Biden administration to expand affordable housing and community development policy solutions. We are launching a new learning management platform, which will offer more training as well as video archives for all of our virtual programming, so you can participate in NH&RA at your own schedule. We'll be creating some meaningful educational and business networking opportunities for our members, so stay tuned for some new offerings later on in the year. We are doubling down on our commitment to make NH&RA a more diverse and equitable organization and to assist our members in their own DEI goals as well. And of course, we're working really diligently to prepare to host safe, meaningful in-person events with a virtual and/or live stream component when it is safe to do so. And I sincerely hope that that'll be this year. As this is the annual meeting, there is a little bit of official membership business that will occur over the course of the next few days as well. Most importantly, we will be looking to get a vote of the membership of the incoming NH&RA Board of Directors slate. We're going to be doing this by poll at the start of the Friday morning sessions. And there's a link to the current slate of Board of Directors on the website. There's actually also the slate in the conference book, but we realized that there was an omission in there by accident. So please refer to the website for the complete slate. But please take a few moments over the course of the next couple of days to peruse the slate and be ready for that vote Friday morning. I also wanted to point out our editorial partner, Tax Credit Advisor. We are continuing to put out, I think, a very meaningful publication that will be covering this event as well as other activities that we're hosting and timely developments within the industry. It's a fantastic magazine that I think with the addition of our new editor, Paul Connolly, who many of you perhaps have met or are looking forward to meeting, is really taking it to the next level. And I hope that you will consider, if you're not already a subscriber, consider becoming a subscriber. We're going to be sharing this month's issue, the March issue, in the follow-up from this meeting. Hopefully it is in the mail on the way to your mailboxes. I haven't received my copy yet because the Postal Service, I guess, is going a little slower than usual this year, but for those of you who are subscribers, it's on the way. And wanted to encourage you all, obviously, to become subscribers if you're not. And I just wanted to put in one last plug also. Obviously, NH&RA is a membership organization. We've mentioned that quite a few times already in the introduction. Members receive a wealth of benefits, including information resources, business-to-business networking and development opportunities. We've expanded our digital benefits in this year through additional things like, obviously, our virtual meetings and our town halls. We're launching new training in the coming year in addition to our current slate. And I think it's a really valuable membership. Your membership not only supports your organization, but obviously it supports our ability to remain effective as advocates to pursue our research and our various outreach projects in the administration on Capitol Hill and across the state. So thank you for that support, and know that you're not just getting benefits directly from your membership, but you're supporting the important work that we do. If you're a member, once again, thank you so much for your continued support. If you're not a member, I would love to invite you to join us to be part of our community of leaders. Your support benefits all of us. And with that, I'm going to transition us just a minute ahead of schedule to our opening panel. I'd especially like to thank our opening panel sponsor, ProLink Solutions, for supporting the Developers Roundtable. They've been a great supporter of our virtual events over the past year and are one of the innovative tech platforms that's helping our industry adapt to the new normal. Now I'd like to share a brief video from ProLink.
Are you a housing developer interested in learning more about deal financing and perhaps some ways to make your new exciting development projects work?
Procorum is a platform where housing developers are applying for tax credits in states where ProLink Solutions is serving as our customer. Procorum Marketplace is next in the evolution of our technology offerings. On the marketplace, developers can find alternative funding sources. Lenders and equity investors are waiting to provide funding on your deal.
Try Procorum Marketplace today and get your project funded.
Thank you again, ProLink, for your generous support. I'd like to ask our opening panel to turn on their videos, and I'm going to get our introduction started. So at NH&RA, we think of ourselves as the Association for Tax Credit Developers. It's obviously an interdisciplinary group. However, the hub of our association wheel, the center for which all of our activity and the partnerships flow is around those developers. And as such, we always find it to be very meaningful to kick off our association discussions with a roundtable featuring innovative developers to explore cutting edge trends and issues, opportunities and challenges. I'm particularly excited about this afternoon's discussion. I think we've got a great slate of topics and a fantastic group of speakers that are going to provide a lot of insight. Our panelists bring great and varied affordable housing development experience and are all leaders. Starting with Arjun Nargakati, president of Amcal Multi-Housing, one of the leading developers of affordable housing in the Western US and Texas, and has been very active in our California Developers Council. Very happy to have Vicki Lundy-Wilben, principal and executive vice president of the Intego Group, based out of Atlanta. She and her colleagues at Integral helped invent the Hope 6 program with their centennial development, and I think have been really raising the bar, setting the bar and then raising it for placemaking and its role in community development in terms of mixed income and mixed use developments all around the country. Also really excited to have Stephen White with Vitus, based out of Seattle. Stephen's the founder and managing partner of the firm, and he and his colleagues have specialized in the preservation and redevelopment of the nation's affordable housing stock all around the country. Those are our panelists, and I'm now pleased to introduce our moderator, Jim Spound, president of R4 Capital Funding, who'll be kicking us off. So Jim, without further ado, the panel is yours.
Thank you, Tom. And I guess good morning or afternoon to everybody, wherever you're sitting. Just really to reiterate Tom's words, I am, when I was given the opportunity to moderate this panel, I just thought it was a privilege based on who's on this panel, based upon both kind of their breadth of accomplishments in the development of affordable housing, but also the variety of new construction, preservation, planned community, focused redevelopments. I think we really touch the realm of what we all try to do, what we either develop or finance in this industry. So it's just a privilege. And, you know, I think every conference that sort of kicks off the year really begins with a temperature taking of what both the challenges and opportunities we face in the coming months and coming years. And this year starts with some evolutions and starts with some surprises. And I can't think of a better group to help us all kind of navigate our thinking process. So with that, I'll just introduce myself and then ask all the panelists to do the same. I'm Jim Spound. I'm the president of R4 Capital Funding. R4 Capital Funding is a 5-year-old tax-exempt lending platform. We provide both construction and permanent financing on predominantly 4% transactions. We are a subsidiary of R4 Capital, which is a nationwide syndicator of tax credit, of tax credits. We started the lending platform, which I'm responsible for, in 2016 with the objective of really creating access. You know, we're a financial intermediary, so our goals were to create access to our markets for financial institutions, opportunities to participate from institutions who don't necessarily have the staff and the groups kind of that walk around the industry the way that we all do. For the development, the value proposition is we're a direct lender, private placement, direct purchaser, however different folks call it. But our goal is to provide an extremely efficient, customized, nimble execution that's economically cost competitive and process-wise just very nimble. We distinctly and intentionally do not tie debt and equity products, but in the event where we are both the equity provider and the construction and permitter, we are an extremely coherent platform with one underwriting, one asset management servicing, kind of one coherent processing and not kind of different silos. So we think we distinguish ourselves that way. We have closed about $1.6 billion in tax-exempt financings and in 20 states and the District of Columbia, and we're sort of doing, call it $500 to $700 million a year nationwide of tax-exempt mortgage lending. And with that, why don't I turn it over for introductions? Arjun, do you want to go first?
Sure. My name is Arjun Nagarkari. I am the president of AmCal Multi-Housing Inc., and we've been in business for 42 years. Vertically integrated company. We do our own acquisitions, entitlements, project management, and asset management, I guess. And we do our own construction. The only aspect that we don't do is basically property management, that we actually farm out to third-party property managers. We have approximately a little over 10,000 Section 42 units in our portfolio, and are very active in California, Texas, and the state of Washington. We primarily do new construction, and we do the Section 42, workforce housing, market rate housing, and student housing.
Thank you, Arjun. Vicki, would you like to go next?
Certainly. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Vicki Lundy-Wilbon. As was mentioned earlier, I'm Executive Vice President of the Integral Group, and I also serve as President of our Community Development Group. We're in Atlanta, founded in '93, and we developed here in Atlanta by transitioning and transforming really two public housing communities, Techwood and Clark Howe Homes, into a community of choice, mixed income, mixed finance model, Centennial Place. And the authority here in Atlanta had received HUD dollars and looked for a development partner that could really expand what they could do with those dollars, leveraging those funds. And in that work, we created the legal, regulatory, and financial model that's used to, redevelop, transform communities across the country in no doubt your states, your cities, where public housing and other communities have been transformed into these mixed income communities. That has been a legacy work for us, and we continue to do that work, especially through the community development group that I run. We have over years, but expanded that work into commercial real estate as well. So while we are based in Atlanta, we have satellite locations in Los Angeles and Dallas, and most recently in Florida. And we continue to do the community development work, but do a lot of commercial, high-end, multifamily residential work. In fact, the transactions that we developed in Sacramento and in Denver, Colorado, at the time that they sold, were the highest selling assets in those markets. The interesting and diversity of our company and the work that we do is whether the conversation that's needed is a capital A affordable that has workforce housing, market rate housing, and that continuum of mixed income. We understand and can execute on that model, but also clearly understand the commercial real estate market and returns. And as things are changing, and more of those market rate developments, whether it's because public-private partnerships and funding sources require some workforce housing, or just the developers' will and desire to do that, we understand that. So that continuum is what we do of development work, and scalable, sometimes just the right location, single property, and other times we do large multi-phase master plan developments. About 300 employees. We are vertically integrated, so we develop, we own, and we manage our properties. And I'm happy to be here with my colleagues to discuss affordable housing.
Thank you, Vicki. Really not least, Steve White, would you introduce yourself?
Great, yeah, thanks, Jim, and thanks, Tom, for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. Always a great meeting. Vitus, we're based in Seattle. We got our start in 1993, just like Vicki's company. We're not vertically integrated, so we're just a pretty lean team of about 25 people. We specialize in the preservation of existing affordable housing, originally funded under legacy programs with HUD. And it's almost a time capsule of properties that were originally funded in the 1970s through about the early 80s. And as time has passed, that's now 30 or 40 years ago, those projects have been running out of their entitlements time-wise, and then also incurring some fairly substantial physical needs for expensive items that aren't normally funded out of cash flow, elevators, roofs, exterior windows, that kind of thing. So we tapped the low-income housing tax credit program, the 4% credits. We combine that with tax-exempt bonds, and that's our formula to acquire these properties, hopefully ahead of the market rate or conventional competition for them, and renew the affordability, make sure that all the residents remain in place, make sure that it remains affordable for you know, more than a decade, 2 decades or more in the future. And we do that all over the United States. Our portfolio, which we own and asset manage, is more than 13,000 units, and we're in 27 or 28 states. In terms of geography, we're located in Seattle, but you know what we're finding is that the coastal states, whether that's the West Coast or the East Coast, are very competitive real estate markets. Right now, it would be very difficult, for instance, for us to do projects in California or even in my hometown of Seattle here. We've found success in the last couple, 3 years, migrating a little bit more to the Southeast, where we found success in Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, basically emerging markets which are benefiting from a migration from these intensely crowded urban areas into areas like Chattanooga, Saratoga, Wilmington, even some of the larger cities in the Southeast, such as Nashville and Charlotte. And that's where we're seeing a lot of our activity these days. So our portfolio, as a result of the way that we focus and the projects that we focus on and the way that we finance them, is remarkably a homogeneous portfolio of more than 100 properties, and that's going to be our path in the future.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, everyone, for those introductions. Opportunities and challenges. I think probably the vast majority of us on this call, maybe with the exception of Tom and his colleagues at NH&RA, woke up to a December surprise this year, and it was when the 4% credit became a real 4% credit. And you know, I think certainly on the financing side, we're experiencing that as a long wished for but significant structural change, with both, you know, consequences that we hoped for and some unexpected consequences as well. And so if to begin, I'd like to ask each of you kind of how that's affecting your businesses currently, your business planning. You know, you can take it anywhere from availability of private activity bonds, health of the tax credit equity market, how the public sector, in particular your states of focus, might be adjusting their programs as they see a higher amount of equity become available for projects, but maybe less available private activity bonds. So Steve, why don't we go in reverse order, and I'll begin with you, and would appreciate your thoughts on how you're impacted by the 4% credit. Great. Yeah. So, you know, we think we've been advocates of the 4% floor for a long time now. And you know, I'm just so grateful to see the efforts of the industry pay off in this really significant change. So how do we think about the 4% floor? First of all, you know, we had a number of straddle projects that we had acquired on a bridge last year and are carrying forth into this year. And so, you know, we are retooling those projects and discovering the ways the different participants in each deal look differently at the 4% credits. The states are looking to make sure that there's a robust rehab, and to the degree it can be increased, they're looking for an increase in the amount of rehab per unit, which we're only too happy to do. The investors, or the upper tier investors, are looking for more reserves, going back to the notion of a 6-month reserve as opposed to what it had been during the times before this.
And the investors are looking themselves to sort of correct the yield to make sure that the increased amount of equity compared with the losses that really don't change doesn't dilute the yield. And so what that means is a slight reduction in pricing. So we're seeing all of these things and forecasting all of these things in our projects going forward. It's safe to say that from about a penny to a penny and a half is what we've seen in a reduction of equity pricing on our projects as a result of the 4% floor. And then, as I said, the increase in reserves. So, you know, what it does, I'll broaden the conversation a little bit. What it does is it makes some projects feasible that weren't before. They were perhaps on the level, and the 4% floor provides more equity for that. And we're happy to see that. I'm not sure that the industry's argument that the 4% floor generates more units is necessarily true. At least it's not true in our case. It's more project focused, where each project on a standalone basis becomes simply a stronger project, a better project, because of the greater amount of equity. I think, as you alluded to, Jim, earlier, what we're seeing is as a result of the 4% floor, more people turning to that, and then there's an increased demand for bond cap. And so, you know, really, I think one of the key solutions toward our housing crisis, in the way of providing more affordable housing, would be to, you know, pair this 4% floor, which we've just seen, together with a 25% test instead of the 50% test, thus potentially doubling the amount of bond cap that's available. That produces more units, and that's you know, that in combination with the 4% floor is I think going to be a very effective tool. But for us, it just makes every project stronger.
Yeah, I think what you know, the coastal states by and large were constrained on private activity bonds before this legislative change. So I think we're seeing just growth in our business and growth of opportunity to deliver more units are kind of in the middle of the country, where feasibility was a bigger issue on projects as opposed to the availability of bonds. But Vicki, how has Integral been impacted by this change?
I'll just add to what was said earlier. We were happy to see the 4%, lock rate on that floor. Ever since the 9 that occurred some years ago, we were thinking, what about the 4% credit? So very happy to see that it did occur. But it, somewhat reminds me of the carnival game Whack-A-Mole. You hit one thing and you fix that, and then, there's other issues that begin to come out of that. We see it as a good tool to use, because not only are we looking at new development and acquisitions, but we have an aging portfolio. Those deals that were originally financed using low-income housing tax credits now are out of their compliance period, and we're needing to turn those deals, do the rehabs to keep those competitive and wonderful living communities. And the 9% credits were, very competitive in every state. We all know that reality. And, it was the issue that you mentioned earlier, especially in the Southeast, that it was the financial feasibility. So these 4% credits help that gap, to close that gap. There's new challenges, because now in a number of the states in the Southeast, there's volume cap issues. So now that the 4% credit rate is locked, and so now the 4% are competitive when there used to be, if you could get a deal to work with 4%, just get your application in, you were kind of in control of your own destiny. That is not the case everywhere, but still the tool is there for us to use in that way. It's interesting, we're seeing the market trying to settle on pricing, because there is an influx of new demand coming in because of the 4% credits. And, so the cherry picking of the deals, which deals make sense, and what will the yield be, and how will it affect pricing? So, we've seen fluctuation in that regard. There's some things that are locked, but others we're really trying to see where this will go over the next few months, which is really interesting. But still see it as very helpful but I do agree. I'm not sure how many new units it will necessarily bring on until some of these other factors settle, whether that be pricing, whether that be volume cap, to allow these deals to go forward. But there's a lot of pent-up demand, which will allow us and others to take care of their aging portfolio as they are looking for new deals, and also acquiring properties to continue to grow the portfolio of affordable housing.
Are you seeing, you know, whereas you've been obviously we work on, you know, sometimes 1 or 2 years, and as developers, I think it seemed, you know, transactions come to fruition that might have been in the pipeline for 5 years. Are you seeing any shift in policy where, you know, you might be losing a source of soft money, or are you, what has the conversation been like for you with your, you know, public participants?
I just think, again, one of the big issues is just resources. And because there are more deals now that are pursuing those resources, they all become harder to get. The competitiveness of achieving, you know, a good sound capital stack is more difficult. So, you know, you think about the different sources, whether it's the tax credits, whether it's the bonds, whether it's, you know, Federal Home Loan Bank, AHP loans, home funds, CDBG, you know, the laundry list of all of those soft dollars that sometimes is the difference between whether, or other subsidies around rental subsidy. All of those resources are now stretched so thin because the need for affordable housing is so vastly undermet that it's all a scramble. And often what we find ourselves in the competitive rounds is realizing more and more that it is all about the scoring. You find yourself executing the transaction if it's in a competitive round. And in some cases now bond deals are going to be more competitive than they were before, because scoring is king. Because you can have a great deal. We all have had great deals that we thought there's, you know, this is a fabulous deal, and you can line up and say that, but because it didn't score, it did not get the resources that it needed to, you know, to come to fruition. So I think that is also part of the issue, is around resources. And just one thing that I'll note, so I think in addition to all of those entities that have always played a part in helping to fund affordable housing and being a part of that solution, that hopefully we'll see more and more institutions stepping up, whether those be, you know, unions or other large employers or some of our corporate giants, getting into this, the mix of understanding that they need to be a part of creating housing for much of their workforce. Because I think it's going to take more resources coming into being put on the table. We can't continue to just shuffle around and work with what's currently there. So
that's interesting, because I think, you know, in Steve White's part of the world, in our company's been involved there. You know, there has been public discussion over the impact of large employers, and in the West, those tend to be technology employers. The impact that they've had on affordability. So a number of them have adopted initiatives, and maybe we should be back later in this conversation and talk about policy, both public and private, that might be helpful, but maybe that could serve as a model for in other parts of the country where it may not be as technology dominated, but employers have a lot of impact on the housing market. Arjun?
Yeah, I think, I mean, from the standpoint of the 4% being fixed, I think it's really given flexibility to the industry from a new construction standpoint. I think it makes a marginal difference in terms of, you know, additional number of units. But what it really does is it, you know, allows for maybe less public funds, or it allows for, you know, working in communities that you otherwise could not work in because the cost of land was higher. So it gives you a lot more flexibility. And from that standpoint, we could, you know, we're looking at sites in areas that typically did not work either because of land cost or otherwise. or there was no soft funding in the area. Now that those areas open up, and as Steve and Vicky said, it's going to create more competition, no doubt, and that's really where we are. So it really comes down to the amount of bond cap we have at the end of the day, and that's really going to be the determinant. And so to the extent we can have some flexibility on the 50% rule would go a long way in providing more units. But I think that's a welcome thing for the industry as a whole. And, we need the flexibility. There are things that change. That's been constant. So to that end, we certainly welcome it. It really helps us. Fortunately, we don't have any legacy projects, but Vicky's right. It's really something that'll get these projects off the ground. And, that's where we are.
So specifically, how has it changed your activities over the last couple of months? Have you just started to revisit situations where deals didn't pass allowed, or what have you done?
We've actually gone back because we've kind of been through our land acquisition process, and it's really been a issue of feasibility at the end of the day, and the amount of soft subsidies that he may get to the project or not. I mean, we've done projects both ways, both in terms of using subsidy and not using a local subsidy. And so to that end, in areas where, land price was slightly higher or didn't have a DDA or a QCT, those projects typically didn't work in some areas because rents weren't high enough to basically support those projects. And we can actually go back into those areas. And to that end, I really think, we're kind of looking back at higher opportunity areas that we were looking at in terms of, putting our 4% projects in. And it's been a difficult task at trying to get these projects off the ground. And so, it's typically been DDAs or QCTs or some form that kind of helps the project financially move forward. This certainly opens up a lot more areas for us.
Jim, I have a question for other two participants here. We don't really use soft funds ourselves, but both you have mentioned soft funds. Looking at this from a macro resource standpoint, do you think that the 4% floor, which provides 25 or 30% more equity, do you think that for certain projects reduces or eliminates the need to draw on soft funds, and then has sort of a ripple effect into maybe the 9% or the permanent supportive housing world, where there are more soft funds available for the deeper affordability because of the reduced reliance on that almost workforce 50%, 60% AMI world?
My thought is that what this does is it closes the gap on deals that were not feasible, less than takes away the need for them to maybe also have some soft dollars to them. So to the degree that it removes the need for any of the soft dollars to come into the transactions, I'm not seeing that completely inside of the deals that we're underwriting. One of the things that I wanted to say, I do think that the 4% credit it may not change the number of units overall, increase them, but I think it would absolutely have more units delivered in a shorter period of time. So from a timing aspect, I do think that it will make have some benefit to the availability or those units being delivered to the marketplace, because projects that were stalled now will be able to go forward in a shorter period of time.
I agree. I mean, it's really in terms of subsidies and your question, Steve, I think the additional credits could be used in a number of different ways. As I mentioned, it's really, it could be offset with subsidy. You could go with lower affordability. You could pay more, in terms of land. So in terms of that, it goes a long way from that standpoint.
I've been involved. There was that brief window, and hopefully it affected you positively as well, Steve, or the capitalization of your transactions, where a project was under contract last year and it was anticipated to close late last year, and it got pushed this year to take advantage into this year to take advantage. And I have seen 2 of those projects lose some level of public funding, but that's because essentially what was a very tight capitalization became kind of a fully funded and fully funded development fee project. So, you know, the developer's initial suggestion was to, you know, shorten the amortization period on the debt and do other things, and the public sector said no, we can use that money elsewhere, and you know, hopefully that's a good thing. Steve, have you seen any? You know, you're out trying to buy projects every day. Have you seen inflation? Have you seen changes in cap rate that you think are attributable
to the 4% floor?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's a bit soon for the market to adjust that quickly. Although, you know, some getting into the brain of a seller, I mean, you know, which is always a dangerous thing. You know, they tend to think that it's an 8% floor instead of a 4% floor. But you know, I think that, you know, the real driver for us, and this came up in a chat question, and I assume you're going to want to get into that, Jim, is interest rates. You know, with interest rates being so low, that has generated you know, just competition all across the board for properties, and in creating competitors out of conventional investors who don't necessarily, you know, have the same business plan and aren't looking toward the long-term affordability of a project, but, you know, perhaps a shorter hold. But that has forced our business model into one where, you know, we have to put a lot more of our money into these projects on a bridge acquisition, and hold till we can get volume cap, or just until we can you know, secure commitments for permanent financing or tax credit investor. So that's really what the interest rate market has done for us by increasing the competition. And then with the increased competition, we have to act like a conventional investor and perform equally quickly. I'm not sure that I've seen the 4% floor have an effect like that. But, you know, I think that and maybe if I can anticipate the question you're going to ask because of the chat question, you know, as we see interest rates increase, you know, I'm not sure that that's a you know, terrible thing. I mean, we've got you know, this is just part of a normal real estate cycle, and in part the values of the properties that we acquire, whether that's land or whether that's an existing property, a legacy head property, those values have been increased by those higher rates or those lower rates. So as rates increase, we're hoping the values soften a little bit, and that's traditionally been the trade-off that we've seen over time.
I think we're very sensitive. We're all very sensitive to interest rate increases right now. And let's come back toward the panel and discuss it. One of the things that kind of hits you is when you've been in this low interest rate, when you've been in a rate where you might be borrowing permanent at 3.5% to 4%, a 30 basis point rise, which we've, you know, just seen in a couple of weeks. You know, that's a 10% cut in your proceeds. So that is pretty impactful to properties, but so hopefully it won't move up too quickly if it's going to move up, and give everybody a chance to adjust. The other thing I think that happened, aside from the 4% credit, I think everybody's aware that we've been living in a pandemic for, I always think it dates back to the housing conference last year, where a bunch of Republicans, including Pence, showed up at the hotel the day after Pence was made the COVID czar, or whatever they called him. But we've been in this a year. Obviously, within the COVID era, there have been a lot of mini eras. There was kind of an overall upset in the capital markets in the spring. We came through that, and things really settled down in the fall. Interruptions in supply chain, inflation, so in construction, and then, you know, potential underwriting changes and operational changes. So within the realm of, you know, there's very hopeful news, but we're going to be living in this era of a pandemic, at least through the balance of this year with some impacts beyond, address how that's kind of affecting our business. And again, how's it affecting the way your lenders and investors are underwriting you? How's it affecting your construction? How is it affecting your operations? And Vicki, would you like to begin with that?
Absolutely. And I'll look at the different steps along the way. So we had a number of properties that were in their lease up when the pandemic hit the country, and the impact, of course, to the lease up, people were on lockdown, they weren't leasing up, and it extended that lease up period for the properties, which had, underwriting impact to those developments that would have normally leased up in a much shorter period of time, took us, 4 or 5 months longer than originally projected to lease up. So there was some, absolutely some impact there. And then even some of our stabilized properties, we're now really coming to understand some of the impact of those residents that lived in our community, that live in our community, that were, some, furloughed, some laid off, no longer had, the revenue coming in. And it was interesting, it's the blend of those that are doing everything they can and maybe essential workers and still have the income and trying to cover all of their expenses. You have some that are taking advantage of many of the programs that are out there to help with their rental income. And then you have some that are taking advantage of this opportunity of maybe I just don't have to pay rent during this period of time. But all of that, of course, impacts the stability of the properties. And as things move on, I'm just trying to ferret through that has been, a challenge, if you will, to our property management and a strain on, because they are also working through this pandemic. So being a developer, and we, also own the property. So we're in the general partnership and we have the property management company. We're living through that continuum part of it through the lease up and also the operation. So a huge impact there that we are working with our residents, working with our communities to continue to house them, and those that are doing all that they can do, and then those that are taking advantage of the situation, which are very few, but that's just the reality of the mix. We had developments that were in the construction phase that had, appliances. One was at the point we were going to pull COs and we're waiting to get appliances in for us to be able to pull the CO, or windows in another development. So the supply chain impact was absolutely real, and it was, no fault of the contractor or the subcontractors. It was just the reality of the time that we were in, and those industries trying to adjust to not having the production that they normally would have anticipated. And that had impact to, the overall delivery of those. And thank goodness we're on the other side of those, but that was real impact, and it was concerning on how long would this last and what would the impact be. And then just even trying to stabilize properties. Once you get them leased up, having the underwriters, as they're looking at, have you met the stabilization requirements, really digging into, what's temporary, why are the collections, economic occupancy and the physical occupancy difference, and how do they underwrite that to get comfortable that, they should release that next installment, et cetera. So it had a real impact on the developments that had closed and were in that continuum. On those deals that we are moving to a closing, there was some delay, and primarily because if we were in permitting, that process of working through the local government permitting process, because of how they were trying to handle it and what their employees working from home. So it really did have an impact for us on the entire process, regardless of where we had projects along the way, that we are seeing, a lot of improvements. Some things have worked their way all the way through, and others are still, we have projects that we're looking to close, in the next 30 days that we're, having to really chase the permitting process to get those permits released so that we can move to the closing table.
So would you say, Vicki, the biggest challenge for you is sort of, I think in terms of what we finance, it seems, we used to either be waiting on, HUD, or I would say it's to much more local approvals and permitting. would you say some of the other operational issues have worked their way through at this point, or?
I would say so. A lot of it is more local. I mean, as far as our lenders or investors and, you know, the legal teams that are working on document, that seems, you know, we're as efficient as we always have been working through the process. It's the public side of it, whether it be a deal that does have HUD approval in it, those have, you know, slowed, and definitely where we have local government involvement around permitting, that has been impacted.
Thank you. Steve, you occupied units, and it's certainly access and for both, you know, due diligence and then for getting in and doing your rehabs that has been impacted. Do you want to, how have you kind of adjusted, and do you feel like you've mastered it, or you're making do, or how does it work for you now?
Well, I think there's an increased reliance on the part of our due diligence contractors to perform their investigation and analysis from a distance. And if they can do that, they will. There's certainly more reluctance two ways on the part of the contractors to go into the properties, sort of, you know, if without any alternative. And then, you know, a reluctance by the residents of the properties to have people just, you know, walk through their units as we used to do in the old days. So I think the whole due diligence industry, if you will, has adapted to this and found new and safer ways to perform their tasks. A bigger issue for us is the in-place rehabs, which we've been you know, has been an integral part of the way that we approach the repositioning of our properties. And with I guess there's a couple of thoughts there. When certain states have simply said you can't do in-place rehabs anymore, the residents have to have an accommodation off-site, perhaps in an extended stay hotel for the entire duration of the rehab, and then they can come back to their units. And then there's other states in which we're continuing to do the in-place rehabs where residents return to their units every day at the end of the day. But there's a lot more safety protocols in place and a lot more emphasis on not going into areas of the units that the contractors don't need to, and you know, making sure that some pretty strict sanitation procedures are followed. That's, you know, that those two impacts, the due diligence and the in-place rehabs, are most of what we're seeing with regard to COVID.
So most of us like to think, and we'll find out sometime down the road, that when we come out of the era, we've learned things that will make us, some things we'll go back to doing the way we used to doing, and some things will, you know, we obviously have a different view of remote work, but some things we think, because we've had to be adaptive, we'll do differently. Has something come out of this in terms of how it's impacted the way you take care of units when they're in the rehabilitation period that you think, you know, will sort of stick with you once the pandemic is no longer with us?
Well, for sure. I think the procedures regarding in-place rehab, it's not only what's developed and emerged is not only more sanitary and from a public health standpoint, but it's also, you know, more respectful of the residents and the units they occupy. This is their home. Now, it's not like we were not respectful before, but just this takes it up another level or two. And you know, I don't see that changing. I think it's an improvement in the process.
I hope airlines continue to clean their cabins better as well. So, Arjun, what do you have to add to this discussion?
Yeah, in terms of, you know, when COVID first began, it was more an issue of, you know, everything came to a standstill in a sense. And since then, because of travel restrictions and us being in states other than California, it was really hard for our construction staff to get out to the sites. And so I would say our costs went up because we started using the you know, services of consultants to basically do what we would otherwise have done ourselves. you know, having all these PPE protocols on the site, making sure there's distancing. So there's a lot more work in that standpoint. I agree with Vicky. There was some issues in terms of you know, appliances coming in. I don't know why appliances is something that got hit more so than anything else. But I think the biggest brunt has been probably taken by you know, our properties and operations, where you know you have stagnating rents because we want in a position to increase rents on the tenants. At the same time, we saw expenses go up in properties where the landlord covered the utilities because more folks were spending more time in the units as opposed to outside. And just generally administrative costs went up. I think our social services team did a fabulous job in, you know, trying to get these tenants the services they needed, which, you know, for example, getting them medication, getting them, their groceries and such, because most of the social programs are pretty much put on hold if they could not be performed on, you know, a virtual network, so to speak. But at the end of the day, I think we've learned to operate more efficiently. I know as things go back and, we go back to the normal way of doing things, we probably question each thing and say, can this be done virtually efficiently? And if not, we'll probably travel. So in the future, I expect our travel will probably reduce because that was kind of the default. And we thought we had to meet someone in person and it could not be done, virtually. And now we realize it's, in a big sense, it can be done virtually. So there's some good things that have also come out of it.
And how are you seeing, clearly the operational changes and costs that have gone up and collections issues? How have things, relative to where you thought we might be 6 months ago or last spring, how have things sort of held up for you? And if you were on the lending or investing side of the table, what kind of precautions would you take?
In terms of costs gone, I think the main thing, like I said, is really in the operation side of things. And that's more from a standpoint of, the rents not going up and the expenses going up. But from that standpoint, where we saw rents going up, we could actually increase rents on properties that had Section 8 vouchers or Section 8 properties, because that really didn't affect the end user in a sense. So in that sense, it can kind of help stabilize that property. But just generally going forward, I think we've been kind of tightening up on expenses on the properties, putting more focus on it to make sure we're within it. Fortunately, we've not had to dip into any of the operating reserves that we've had. So to that end, we're still kind of keeping it on standby lest we need it in the future.
Vicki, I know you self-perform management on all your properties. Have you seen other shifts that are maybe different, or would you? Is your experience very much the same as Arjun's?
Very similar, and he made a good point around the social service and the work that had to be done to help to protect and support so many of the residents that live in the community because they had needs, and we have the ability to help them, and at the same time keeping both parties, the residents and the staff, safe. Did increase our expenses and the time that was spent. So what I'm hopeful of is that you mentioned kind of underwriting and what do you expect, or the lenders to do, or what would you do in their place. What I hope that we don't have come out of this is an overcorrection, trying to account for this event that none of us could have been expected, and wouldn't expect this to happen repeatedly. So not to build that into kind of an underwriting model in a way beyond maybe the 6 months that was mentioned earlier, but I'm hopeful that we realize that this is something that was very unusual that happened to us, to the world, you know, to the country, and that doesn't impact the underwriting and how reserves are expected to be underwritten and capitalized in these transactions.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I don't know that I speak for the financial investor side of the business, but you know, the major difference between bringing a transaction to an investment committee now, you know, as compared to a year ago, is that we spend a lot more time talking about, you know, is the development time frame adequate? You know, are the subcontractors bought out? And, you know, sort of execution related issues that we would have spent less time. I don't know that there's been any material change. I would agree with you. I don't know that there's been any material change in kind of underwriting metrics. And, you know, obviously anything that we undertake now, we expect, you know, I don't know if there's any other way to be, knock on wood, but we expect to come out in a time where the world looks better than it has in the last couple of years. So, I mean, that's certainly the way we're approaching it. But I guess I would like to go around one more on that question. I mean, Steve and Arjun, have you felt an impact in how your capital partners have looked at your transactions from a credit perspective?
Well, initially, you know, it was really a sense of we're all in the same boat, not knowing exactly where things are going. And it's one of those times that, you know, the industry sees every, you know, 10 years or whatever, you know, where there's just a general pause and reassessment. It happened, you know, at the beginning of the Great Recession with, you know, the Lehman Brothers and Fannie happening in the same week and all that. And also after to a lesser degree, after the a large corporate tax cut, trying to figure out where things were going next. You know, at that time, there were a lot of fears, I remember, with regard to rent collections and you know, the stability of the financial markets, the willingness of the financial markets to continue to support a project as it was in the past. And then as time passed, you know, certainly for our projects, you know, we had very little impact operationally from COVID. You know, with as Arjun mentioned, you know, with project-based Section 8, we are less vulnerable to things like this, but we have been tracking the resident paid portion of the rent, not just the entire rent, but the resident paid portion. And, you know, our collections have been about 90% compared to prior periods. And that happens just, you know, for a relatively short period of time. HUD will engage in interim income certifications for Section 8 residents whose economic circumstances have changed. So we've leaned into that and helped them to sort of right the ship so that, you know, they can get back to a rent that's affordable for them. So on the income side, it's been a relatively small impact. And I think, getting back to your question, Jim, as investors and lenders have seen that pattern emerge and develop over the, you know, 12, 13 months that we've been in this, it's really a very minimal or no impact. With regard to expenses, you know, with more people at home, we've seen utilities increasing. And so there's an increased demand on utilities. That's been an increased expense. Also, an increased investment in cleaning supplies and people to do the cleaning and sanitizing. Those are the two big expense areas that we've seen an increase. Everything else has been pretty much as it was before.
Arjun, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, just in terms of you know, debt and equity, I think there's been more scrutiny and maybe not surprisingly, it's not been on the Section 42 product, but it's been on the student housing product and the market rate product, which maybe they have less of a, you know, they know less of. So there's a lot more scrutiny in the other businesses that are being run in terms of what might be the risk and how may it affect the project at hand, so to speak. But we haven't seen anything on a project level, on a Section 42 level, in terms of, you know, more reserves or otherwise.
Thank you. So when this group got together a few weeks ago to do its initial planning session for this panel, you know, one of the questions that we agreed we should be discussing is when do we think interest rates will revert to some historic norm? I don't know what the historic norm is, but in the interim weeks, interest rates have adjusted more quickly probably than we would have anticipated, based on a sense in the capital markets that there were some building inflationary pressures. Can each of you, and maybe again begin with Vicki, can each of you discuss how that might be affecting your project, or what, or how, you know, you sort of plan around it? Do you build a margin? Do you assume that rates will be higher in 8 months when you close a particular transaction?
So we typically build a margin.
Yes,
even
we underwrite.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Vicki.
So what I was going to say is that when we're underwriting transactions, we always build in some cushion on interest rates, just to whether a half basis point or more, just because, especially in this market. So we're doing that on all of our transactions. Also watching our construction number closely, making sure we have the right contingency number, because we were, you know, as we know, lumber and other things, we were at a time closing some transactions when that instability was happening in the marketplace. But interest rates, you know, we rushed quickly to get some LOI signed for the deals that we're closing in this first quarter, and we'll build in cushion for those deals that will close in the, you know, between now and the end of third quarter.
Thank you. Arjun?
Yeah, we've built a cushion on our projects as we go forward. So we've not done anything differently because of COVID from that standpoint. I'm sorry, I lost my... What is the question again?
The sort of question was about, interest rates have moved on a percentage basis. I mean, historically, you know, we might not have seen a 25 or 30 basis point shift in interest to be a macro shift, but when rates are this low, it is a macro shift. And you know, the question was really, how are you looking at it? Do you think we're reverting to a new normal? Are you assuming rates will be higher when you close your crop of deals, and how do you plan?
No, I think that's a good question, because on a new construction standpoint, our cycle is pretty long. It's usually about a couple of years before we actually break ground from the time we find a site to do that. So we try to put substantial margins there in the event that interest rates go up. In the past, we have had experience actually where projects have died 8 months later because interest rates went up. This is way back when, since interest rates have been low for a while now. But those are kind of the contingencies we've been kind of putting in our projects since then, so that the expectation obviously is the project only gets better, not worse. So hopefully you can cut back on these contingencies as you get closer and closer to closing a deal.
Thank you. Steve, you assume that interest rates will be lower when you go to close, correct?
You know, we're like, you know, our other two fine panelists here. We do build a cushion of 30 to 50 bips into our rate for underwriting reasons, and sometimes we get lucky, and as a result, we end up closing at a 124, 127 DCR, and that's great. We have reduced our expectations in this environment, and to the degree we have started our underwriting at a, you know, let's say a 3.5% perm debt rate. Now, you know, we realize that cushion is likely going to be eaten up in time. I mean, this is a transition period, right? So in time, everything adjusts in parallel, so that, you know, we'll be dealing with a, you know, 4.25% interest rate environment. And I can remember, you know, many years when 4.25 would be seemed like a would seem like a great win, right? I mean, it's fantastic rate, or even 4.5. So it's just that if you have the benefit of knowing that in advance when you first price the real estate and do your initial assessment on a project, it all lines up and everything's in parallel. It's just during this transition time you have to scramble a little bit, and this is a scramble time.
So, you know, kind of in a related topic, because you are you are planning in advance. You know, I assume in most transactions that you acquire, you are competing with market rate developers. And, you know, do you see that trend getting better? Do you see it maybe easing off a little bit with higher interest rates? But what can affordable housing developers be thinking about to more ably compete against market rate developers for both existing properties or sites?
You know, I see the most successful developers who do what we do, and there's a number of really, really great, you know, developers who specialize in preservation. They've all moved toward a bridge model where it's necessary, and most of the time it's necessary. If you want to you know, acquire a project that's in any sort of a desirable community at all, I mean, you can. I'm not going to pick on South Dakota here, but I mean, if you want to acquire a property in a very rural part of South Dakota, of course you can have all the time you want. But if you've got a city that has desirable characteristics, you are going to be competing with market rate buyers, and you need to be prepared to bridge those acquisitions. You know, about the soonest you can actually structure a closing from signing a PSA to the closing is about 120 days. Maybe you can shave 15 days off of that, but that's just due to the HUD consents. Everyone faces that, the conventional buyers and the affordable buyers. But as an affordable buyer, you don't want to be the guy who's saying, well, you know, why don't you give me 9 months so that I can close on my bonds and you can just sort of ride along with me in my business plan. That worked 6 or 7 years ago, and it doesn't work today. So the fundamental shift is to make sure that you really have robust banking relationships and a lot of financial support, and you're able to present a decent balance sheet and you know, compete head to head with the conventional buyers. And that's the big shift for us in the last 2 years. Certainly, I hope that with higher interest rates, some of the conventional buyers you know, lose a little bit of interest in the affordable sector, but I sort of doubt that. I think the conventional buyers are here to stay, and bridge acquisition strategies are here to stay as well.
I would imagine conventional buyers are much like mortgage lending. They're kind of looking for the safest space within the realm of commercial lending, and in our industry, I think kind of is that space today. So,
right.
Arjun, have you seen any, is land more accessible to you today or less accessible to you today? And how do you?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think there are two components to, you know, the difficulty we may see. One is basically a land purchase price when you're competing with a market rate developer. We have less of an issue there than we have in terms of the timing that we ask. As you know, it's going through the entitlement process, going through subsidy requests, increases the length of time from the time you actually tie up a site. So really to tie a property up for a 1.5 or 2 years is a long time. So what has happened, because the market in some areas have been heated, is really taking the land down, and that really increases our risk from that standpoint, because if we didn't do that, we wouldn't have the project. So some of the few safeguards we look at when we look at taking land down is, do we have an exit strategy? What I mean by that is, you know, are we buying it at a price that we could easily sell it for if things went south? Could we use it for a different product type? Could we do market rate housing, or could we do student housing, or whatever other product we have? And so we look at that before actually taking the land down, because we feel that that's becoming more a necessity today than it might have been in the last 2 or 3 years.
Thank you. Vicki, just we only have a few minutes, so I want to make sure we hit a few other topics. Another kind of hot topic right now is income averaging. And, you know, I know there's there's certainly increased insecurity on the asset management side of tax credit investors right now with respect to, you know, how the IRS is ultimately going to look at things and how that might affect a property operationally. I'm not sure whether Integral uses income averaging, but if you do, can you kind of address how you view it and what kind of safeguards you've put in?
We want to use it a lot more. We were excited when it was available because we did see it as another tool in the arsenal to make these deals work, to be able to get the, you know, 80% units inside the development, et cetera. But with the ruling and the way there's hesitancy, and in some cases we had investors say we're just not interested in the income deals that have the income averaging. It has made those deals more challenging. We have a deal that will be closing soon that does have it. It's 100% senior. And because those units that are live tech or, you know, 2-bedroom units as opposed to one, there was more comfort with the, you know, next available rules and how that all applies there. And then different state agencies also are having their own reaction to how they want to use income averaging. So for example, if in some of our assets where we are credit deals and we syndicate them, income averaging is not available, for example, to those deals. So as things are coming clear on the, you know, the guidance around it and how you can apply it in different locations, state, we will continue to test it and use it because, again, I think it's another tool in the arsenal for us to try to make some deals work that maybe would not have worked without it. But, you know, we are always in conversation back and forth with our investor pool, testing them, you know, testing our model with them to make sure that we're not putting together a deal that looks good to us, but is not financeable, you know, in the marketplace.
Thank you. Well, I certainly think aside from financial feasibility, it's just good policy, and I very much hope it doesn't get undermined by
absolutely. And we believe in the
short-sighted policy.
It is.
Yes. Arjun, did you want to add anything to, have you kind of been, are you looking at most things with income averaging now, or?
We haven't used income averaging too much, maybe on a couple of projects, but we're looking at the IRS ruling and really concerned that, you know, you have to really assign the units now going forward, which makes it very, very difficult, you know, where it gets to using income averaging. And I'm kind of hopeful that, you know, they take another look at it with all the appeals going in there, because if they don't, I think there'll be a good reason not to do income averaging, even though there are a host of good reasons to do it and reaching a wider range of, you know, population. So that's really what we're waiting on, and we're concerned that, you know, it stays as it is right now, where you have to fix a unit to the tenant, that becomes very, very problematic going forward.
Thank you. So I think we're now at that point of the show with 2 minutes left where we do rapid fire questions. And so the rapid fire question to each of you, I'll begin with Steve, is what would be your public policy? What do you think the most important thing could happen from the federal side to support our industry in the coming year and going forward?
Yeah, I think with the flat floor causing everyone to scramble for volume cap, I think reducing the 50% test to 25% is the most transformative thing that could be done.
Vicki?
Well, that would have been my number one. I think my number two would maybe just be allowing more higher allocation of 9% credits to the states, federal credit.
Well, Steve.
Go ahead.
Well, Steve took my number one too, so I go to the number two, which is really workforce housing. I think the missing middle. I think that's something that needs a lot more focus and funding, because we have this issue where in our current properties where you have tenants that are over income and no place to go, because the jump from where they are to maybe 100 or 120% of median income is not possible. At the other hand, you actually have folks living in market rate units that may have lost their job, and they're now homeless, so they become a bigger burden on the affordable side. So I think just putting all the dollars on 60% and below may not necessarily be the answer. There are other answers to kind of finding some source of subsidy for the missing middle, so we could have more production of the missing middle, and gives an option both to Section 42 tenants moving up when they're over income, and folks from market rate who have economic issues coming down to a less expensive housing type.
Very interesting. It's always been a source of frustration for me that the kind of lack of support on the investor side of our business that we have for mixed income communities. So I concur with that. Tom, would you like? I think we're sort of right on time. Would you like me to turn it back to you?
Yes. Thanks, Jim, and Arjun, Vicky, and Steve. Great discussion. Thank you so much. There were a couple of questions that we weren't able to get to regarding, some of them was regarding emergency rental assistance and stimulus funds, which I think are actually going to be addressed in some more detail on the next panel, and where adjusters are, which I'm sure will be coming up in our tax credit equity roundtable tomorrow. So we are going to take a short break to get the next panel queued up, come back here in 5 minutes, and please take a moment to fill out the follow-up poll that's going to get launched momentarily.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Okay, welcome back. I'd like to begin by getting our next panel started. I've been thinking a lot about the role of the low-income housing tax credit and its structure as a public-private initiative, as I think all of you have as well. I think that's a big reason for the program's success over its 30 plus years of history. We spend certainly a lot of time at our conferences and our association meetings talking about how best to structure the private side of the equation. But I wanted to take a moment introducing this panel to also acknowledge and thank our public agency partners for the important and tireless work that they pursue on the public side of the ledger. This has undoubtedly been a challenging year for our HFA partners in particular, who, in spite of working under extremely challenging circumstances, have kept the industry moving forward, advocating for emergency resources, adapting their public policy rules and regulations and processes for the COVID environment, keeping affordable housing resources flowing, and standing up major new initiatives, all while facing the same kind of challenging work from home conditions and the peril of the public health challenges that we're all facing. The agencies represented on today's panel are looked to by their peers as leaders and certainly by our staff as well. And over the next 50 minutes, we'll be spending some time learning a little bit more about some of their new initiatives, priorities, and challenges. Really very happy to introduce our panel moderator, Milt Pratt, who's Executive Vice President at the Michaels Organization and serves as Vice Chair on NH&RA's Board of Directors, who will be leading our discussion as moderator and getting our panel going. So Milt, without further ado, the panel is yours.
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate the opportunity to be here today. It's Tom Milt Pratt, Executive Vice President at Michaels. Tom, I want to double down on what you said about how our HFA partners are doing the hard work during this pandemic. It's important to know that without all the credits and emergency rental assistance in the way that they've adapted during this pandemic, we wouldn't all be operating our businesses in the same format. So I want to acknowledge that. We've got a great diverse group today. I'll introduce the group. Tanya Curry from Georgia Department of Community Affairs. She's the Deputy Commissioner there. Rich Froelich, First Executive Vice President and COO, New York City Housing Development Corporation. Jennifer Ho, Commissioner with the Minnesota Housing. And Chris White, Executive Director and CEO at the Colorado Housing and Finance Agency. As I said, today we're going to have a lively discussion about the things that our partners are doing in the housing finance space. I think the first thing we want to talk about is to really get into what's going on with the 4% floor. I'll start by just opening that up for conversation. So do our partners at the HFAs expect more applications, more production, more floor? Does it simply offset other cost increase? So why don't I start with my near neighbor, Rich Froelich, since Rich is just up in New York, and throw out those three questions related to the 4% fix.
Great.
Rich?
So this is something that we're really excited about. It's something that we had fought for a long time. So it's super that we have it, and I think it will get more resources for housing. So that's the good news. For us, we already are essentially operating at cap. The state is usually allocating to us about 40% of its cap, so we're getting about 800 million, and so we're already using all of that, and we're already using all of that for new construction. So we don't see that we can necessarily increase activity significantly. The good news is that this is a significant increase in effective subsidy for deals. And so what I think it will allow us to do is sort of reallocate a bit of soft money that we have. And that may allow us to do a bit more preservation, or perhaps some more of the mixed income to sort of kind of address the different needs. But you started seeing it on the prior panel, the issues regarding having more cap, I think, is going to be the bigger challenge. We are going to see, I think, more interest, and this is a national issue, and I think that will lead to more activity. It was a major year for housing bonds in 2020, and you would think with all of the challenges that we wouldn't have been able to do that, but it really was a record-breaking year. A lot of us are coming up on cap issues, especially with places where they also have to do the single-family programs as well. So there are a lot of of challenges, but I think it is really good news, and it's exciting that in Washington there seems to be more help for affordable housing.
All the hard work over those years has finally paid off. Jennifer, you just unmuted. Why don't you talk to us about what your production looks like in Minnesota? How's that going? How's that moving forward in 2021 and beyond?
Yeah, I mean, it's just going gangbusters, which is amazing. We're lucky that we have a lot of state investments, both state appropriations that we can use for that soft money Rich was talking about, and housing infrastructure bonds. We had the largest authorization of those last year, and the governor's asking for more. So, we're seeing the benefit of the 4% floor, but it just exactly as Rich said. It's just allowing us to take the other resources and apply them differently because you just got more in the deal. So we need to go big, and we're trying. So more help from the feds, we're hoping, is on the way, but this was a great fix.
Great. Tanya, you want to add something?
Sure. And thanks again for having us today and allowing some input from the housing finance agencies. In Georgia, it's probably just a little bit different because we hadn't been right at our cap until fairly recently. And so while we recognize that we were getting closer and closer towards the end of 19, we really started looking at it hard. And so in the beginning of 2020, we had to make some adjustments. And we've been working through that all of 20 and going into 21 in terms of the cap. The 4% is certainly going to, provide some benefit, things like, just easier underwriting and more demand because we do need more housing stock in Georgia, just like everywhere else. We're really getting to the point where it's becoming a little bit, you just need more and more supply because we're a very, very large state, and there's a lot of growth in the rural areas and a lot of industry and all of that coming, and people have to live, they need to live close to where they work. And so I think on the last panel, they were talking a little bit about workforce development and housing to go along with that. And so we're trying as a housing and community development agency, we're trying to work on those things together, but we absolutely have seen the benefit of the 4% fix.
All right, Chris.
Thanks, Milt. Yeah, we're very excited about that 4% fix as well. We're a little bit different though. We, it wasn't that many years ago here in Colorado when there were literally 0 4% tax credit deals getting done. So we've never, this circumstance we find ourselves in of bumping up against cap limitations and frankly running out of cap is new to us. We've certainly had episodes throughout our history where, if we looked a year or 2 or 3 years down the road that it looked like we might run out, but the market always corrected for it and solved for it. So now this is different. All things being equal, we're gonna run out of cap next year or the following year, maybe 2 years. We'll always get our state allocation, our allocation from the Department of Local Affairs. So we'll always have that, but we won't have any more carry forward cap as things go. So we're very excited about this 4% fixed floor, and we think it's gonna. Well, I think the reason we're most excited about is it is going to result in incrementally more units getting financed, but one way or the other, either more credits to allocate to more deals or as a substitution for soft funds that can be reallocated to other deals, it is incrementally going to increase the amount of affordable housing units we get to produce. So yeah, we're all for it, and hopefully more to come.
That's great news. And it's so interesting because, we got the fix at the end of 2020. And what happened right after that, interest rates started creeping up, lumber pricing was already going up. And is that just going to be an offset to the 4% fix? I hope not. I hope those things sort of level out a little bit, but I'd be interested to hear from one or two of you about what do you think it was going to happen with some of these costs? And are you taking a look at the cost of projects as well?
Well, I mean, I think we're always concerned about costs, and coming from a high cost place, I think we're specifically conscious of it. I do think that I don't think it'll eat everything up, and so I think it will still have some positives. So I'm not terribly worried about that. we definitely need to keep on top of that. This is additional money into deals, and a lot of our deals are have priced in a fair amount of cushion, and definitely on the interest rate. So I'm not worried about that. And as far as the building costs, I mean, people project out, and I think they have a sense of that. But if the economy really continues to heat up, we may see different things going on in the building trades as well. But you know, the other thing is, I think in a lot of markets, you're seeing market rate housing being a little bit impacted too. Multifamily in particular is sort of in an interesting place right now, and sort of people's attitudes have changed a bit, especially also in higher cost places. People's willingness to sort of room with 3 or 4 folks has changed. So we'll see what happens to our markets. I think it's going to be an interesting period of time.
That's an interesting perspective, Rich. Thank you. To keep moving our conversation, so I'd ask each of you to talk about what major changes are you expecting to your allocations or competitive levels relative to the volume cap in 2021. I hope you can share some details, but of course you can't share things that we aren't supposed to know about. But any tidbits of information you can share with our group. The developers are all anxious to hear about it.
Oh, yeah, well, I'm happy to just say that the direction of our qualified allocation plan is really, trying to deal with rising costs by trying to priority what we do at units that are deeply affordable to low income people. And so I think there's an emphasis on really making sure that in new construction and preservation that we are preserving units that are affordable to people at 50% of AMI and below.
Great. Tanya, I see you had your hand up there anxiously awaiting.
Well, I did. I was just going to jump in. I mean, obviously, we are trying to maintain and rehabilitate and keep as many affordable units as we can and keep that growing in Georgia. But I don't know if this is fresh off the press or if people are expecting this, but we are really not going to have sufficient volume cap for new applications in 2021. And my whole staff authorized me to say that. So I don't know if that's new information or if that's something that people have anticipated. There's a lot in the pipeline. I mean, for us, for Georgia, I mean, larger states that do a lot more volume, it might not be a lot, but we've got about 1.5 billion in the pipeline. And so we're going to be working through those deals in 2021, and maybe towards the end of 2021, we'll have some special amount or some, carry forward amount or something that we can do something a little bit differently, but we're really trying to make sure that everybody has that knowledge and that expectation as we move forward into 2021.
Tanya, because we do work in your state, and I know when you shut down your bond program, I guess it was last year, I think everybody was surprised, but you laid out a very clear set of priorities in terms of what kinds of deals you wanted to see get done. And I don't remember what they were. I think there were 4 different buckets in, I think, public housing and deals that
were. There were.
Can you talk about that a little bit? Because I think as developers knock on the door of state agencies, sometimes they just get we have no volume cap, come see us in 2023. And then we're like, well, what do we do for 2 years? But sure. You, at least your agency was very clear about what the priorities were.
We tried to be, and we tried to address it when we got right up on it. I was getting lots of calls from developers and bond councils and lots of interested parties. But what happened was we received about 95 applications that totaled about 1.7 billion once we put that kind of deadline out that we were going to have to close the application process. And then we separated the applications kind of into 3 tranches, if you will, expiring federal funds, then preservation and RAD transactions. And then we gave the developer a first choice because, sometimes people had, oftentimes people have more than one deal in our state. And so that seemed to help us flow through that process a little bit. And I think that's the part you're referring to, Milton, that was a little bit appreciated and seemed reasonable. And we did get developer feedback on that because we have a great dialogue with, we like to think, with all of the developers that do work in our state. And so, we put those ideas out for not official public comment, but for input into, through our various channels of listening sessions, et cetera, and got that type of feedback. And I think that's what allowed us to get through that little crunch period. And now those are the deals that we're really kind of working through, and we'll be looking forward to opening it back up, because we don't want to stifle, that development and those deals coming to us, but we got to figure some other things out. So that's going to help us move smoothly and help the developers as well, we hope.
Related to that, Rich or somebody else, Chris, could you talk about, do you feel like you're going to start having competitive rounds for private activity bonds? I know several states sort of have that right now. You have to meet threshold and you have to get over a certain hurdle. So like to hear what your agencies are doing.
I'll jump in. So I don't think we will do that because of the amount of soft money we have. We already have sort of prioritization that we do. So on some level, it is sort of this built-in process. If we were doing more preservation deals with volume cap, I think that might work, and you can sort of do the value judgment. But really, because of we only are using volume cap today for new construction, people really have to kind of get into a long lineup for pipeline. It's just, that's the nature of it because of the amount of soft money that's needed. And so we really have a process for that, and there's prioritizations of city-owned land and RFP sites, as well as wanting to make sure that we're highlighting our not-for-profit MWBE communities. And so there's a lot of different priorities that are in place. And so I don't think we wanted to have a kind of formal NOFA type process. But I think if there are more, if there's larger allocation, I think that might make sense. Because we're really dealing with a limited world, I think we have to control it a bit more.
Okay, Chris?
I thanks, Milt. Something similar. We're not going to a competitive process, and hopefully we don't have to, although I could see that on the horizon when we get to a point where there's no carry forward allocations any longer, where we're just using our annual allocation. It could go to that, but that's down the road, and we're talking, years down the road. But what we have done and have had to do, because we could see this coming for the last couple of years, is we've had to do something different. We've had to set aside a pool specific to PAB pool specific to 4% credit, housing credit deals, and we've set that pool based on a ton of feedback from our advisory groups and our partners. And so we've got a $375 million pool allocated to 4% deals, and we're going to start accepting applications. Or if we have, in fact, started accepting applications the first of the month through March through November, we'll take applications for that pool, and it's kind of on a first come, first served basis. We ask for LOIs, letters of intent, so we can kind of gauge what's going to happen with that pool. So we've already received about $356 million in LOIs. So it's all pretty much going to be spoken for when we get through the year. Now, of course, those that send in LOIs, they don't all get done. They don't all close as quickly as possible, but we have tried to set it up on a first come, first served basis. And we've tried to establish some priorities, again, based on that feedback that we got from our partners. So we're essentially prioritizing new construction. We need units. However, we aren't at all opposed to doing, rehab deals. And we've kind of set some guardrails around that. For example, we'll do a rehab deal for an existing credit project that's maybe in year 25 or later of its extended use period, or same sort of thing for a special needs project or a permanent supportive housing project that's in year 16 or later of its extended use period. So again, just by the nature of the way that language is written, it prioritizes new construction, but we'll look at rehab deals based on those constraints that I just mentioned.
Thanks. A related topic is, what are you doing around recycling volume cap? Jennifer, why don't I start with you? What are you doing in Minnesota?
Somewhere across town, my CFO is cringing that I'm about ready to answer this question. So I'll just answer the question by saying I've got a really creative chief financial officer, and we're figuring out how to recycle and reuse and extend and tap these things in many ways so that we can keep up our high production on single family while continuing to do both new development and preservation. I think the answer to every single one of these questions is that we need to grow the federal pie. And it doesn't matter which pot we're talking about. They just all need to grow. They are not sized to need. And I think that each of our states, the environment is slightly different. But I think if you had all 53 of us up here and you asked, does anybody think it's a bad idea to grow the pot? I don't think anyone would say, no, we got enough. So, right. And I think that, I'm hopeful that a Biden infrastructure bill is going to take housing as critical infrastructure seriously. I think we're just seeing more activity on the federal front related to housing. And so I think 2021 is going to be a year where all our eyes and all our phone calls and texts and emails should be heading to Washington to really try to convert the energy, finally, the political energy around housing into a sustained, not a one-time, a sustained investment so that we lift all the floors and raise all the ceilings, or however you want to say it.
Awesome. Rich, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in on recycling. I personally take some credit for this. Actually, I take a fair amount of credit for it. I'm very proud of what we've been able to do with recycling. And the goal that we have in the Credit Improvement Act is to sort of allow recycling to be used for both single family, and we had hoped for other sort of economic development tools. So if we can get recycling broadened that way, I think it really will help, because there sometimes is a competition between the multifamily borrowers, like the members of NH&RA, and our single family programs. And so to be able to sort of get them to sync together, so that way you can get the local housing tax credit that comes with bonds and then recycle to other projects that are single family or even in economic development, would be a great thing. And that would really kind of get everyone rowing in the same direction, because we do have these multiple goals that we're trying to do, and affordable housing has components that are multifamily and single family, and home ownership is important. And so we need to grow the pie, as Jennifer said, and Tanya and Chris, we all are in favor of that, and that we'll be able to do more, and that it is economic activity that is tremendously important to all our communities.
And I can just pile on really quick and just say, this can't become a battle between single family and multifamily. That is a lose-lose proposition. And I just think that we just have to be really careful about that. Especially in Minnesota, where we have one of the worst home ownership gaps between whites and blacks in the country. We cannot just turn this into a single family versus multifamily situation. We have a huge shortage of units, especially units that are affordable to people who make the least. So the answer just needs to be more, not a competition over a pie that's too small. I want to answer every question with more.
I like that, from your lips to the Biden administration's ears. One other thing before we leave the 4%. One of the things that keeps me up at night is the 50% test. Every one of your agencies is being a good steward of the limited federal resources. And so we're always right at 51%. Your underwriting is right to 51%. And oh my God, construction costs go up, soft costs go up, things move around during the construction period. And all of a sudden, I'm not meeting my 50% test. And my CFO, he might even be on the panel or the discussion today. My CFO reminds us about this constantly. Like, you got to watch out for that 51%. Milt, how come you can't get 55%? How come you can't get 57% so you have a little wiggle room? It's a challenge. We all know that, and we all know why. But Rich, you unmuted. I can say because I know your agency watches this very, very carefully. Everybody.
Well, we have an incredibly tight pipeline, and we need to sort of maximize it. The good news, and you should tell your CFO this because he'll really appreciate it, is your developer fee can be a little bit of a toggle there. So I'm sure he'll appreciate that, and maybe it'll calm him down. It probably won't. It probably piss them off more. And you can give him my number, and I'll say it. And but you know, look, there have been very few instances where we really run up against it, and when we do, and when it's legit, we figure out a way to solve for it. So we hear that. But there really are a fair number of tools to resolve that. And joking aside, the developer fee is one of them. And so there are different ways to address it. So we hear you, but it really just comes up so rarely, and we need to run these things tight. It hasn't been a big problem for us.
Yeah, I would kind of agree with that. I don't think that's a major problem that we see. Our team is always, there to kind of work with the developers to make good suggestions. And I don't want to say that we're at a 50%, but I think we sometimes let you go a little bit further in Georgia, Milt. So, but they might be proposing a little bit tighter cap as we go forward. So.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I think developers generally understand it. We all struggle with it, but we at least understand why. I think I speak for the whole group. And wouldn't it be great if the 50% test became the 25% test? I mean, that would make all of our lives easier. Then you could underwrite us to 26%. Jennifer, Chris, what do you think about that 25% test? How would that play out in your agency?
I'm all for it. We'll go up to 55%, just so you know. We talked about 52%, but it hasn't been an issue for us. But regardless of that, I'm a big fan of the discussion on lowering the 50% test down to something less. 25%, I think, would be fantastic. But I'd throw my hat in for anything that reduced that number. To me, it's always felt like low-hanging fruit. It's always felt a little random to me, to be perfectly honest with you. I know a little bit about the history about it, but I think that's something we as an industry should push for. The benefit, the literally tens of billions of dollars that would generate over certain period of years across the nation is legitimate. I mean, the math is pretty simple and straightforward. So I'm all in on that discussion.
Good. I know we do a lot of public housing work, and there's a proposal out there to eliminate public housing from the cap as housing authorities are getting more and more into the 4% world, particularly on RAD deals. I think that's a big plus if we could make that happen as well. So I'd like to get some of your thoughts around that.
Yeah, I think this is an area where we just would like to see the federal government step up and really think about how they're going to help fix that problem. And, I think it's an area where you could see one-time infusions, at least kind of to help us catch up a little bit. Mm-hmm. We're in an interesting spot because we've used general obligation bonds in Minnesota to do public housing preservation. And now we've got these RAD deals, and we're kind of trying to figure out how you thread the needle on what publicly owned is and all that stuff. So, it's definitely, but I just think it would be the easiest thing would be if the federal government would just step up specifically on meeting all of the deferred requirements in public housing. I guess, yeah. To me, it's that simple. It's just like, you built it. Like, there was kind of an embedded promise that's been walked away from there.
Yeah. And I know, Rich, in New York, you're doing a lot of public housing redevelopment without using credits and bonds, as I understand it, on some of those transactions.
Yeah, no, that's right. And that's been challenging. And I think I want to kind of follow up on Jennifer's point, which is that on some level, the federal government is having us kind of split ourselves up a lot in doing this. And there is a sort of a concern in the communities, in particular the low-income communities, the residents in public housing, about what privatization means. And I know that Michaels has done a fair amount of this work, and other big kind of development groups have. And you're great stewards when you do that. There is concern about that, and on some level, the kind of public-private partnership model that we use in almost all affordable housing today is distinct from the public housing model. And it creates a certain tension that I think is challenging. If we were to have more resources and that was the way to sort of tap into it, it's better than not. But I think a more direct support is important, and that, yeah. But, there's a really horrible history there too, and a generational disinvestment. And we need to correct for that. And there are different tools for that. This is part of a tool, but it also, once again, puts it in competition with other purposes, and it makes it tricky. We've done, I think, a really effective job in trying to leverage other resources. And we just, once again, as Jennifer says, I keep on repeating her, more is more, and it's better. And so we can get more resources. I'm all for it.
Great. Well, let's talk a little bit about new construction versus preservation. I heard each of you say one way or the other, yeah, we're all for new construction because we need new units, but preservation's out there. What's your balance like in your markets? Is it 50% new construction and 50% preservation, or is it something else different than that? Well, I'll start with Tanya.
I mean, we're 50-50. That's what we shoot for. You know, it doesn't always come out just exactly like that, but we are, you know, trying to strike that balance. So right now, you know, this year, today, those things could change as we go forward, you know, and in future years, but there's a lot of housing stock across the state that could use updating, and there's a lot of room for rehab. So that could be the growing interest, but right now we're at a 1-to-1 kind of ratio.
That's good. And as each of you answer this, help our group understand, what are the factors that lead you to a 50-50? Is it something that you're seeing in your state, something that developers should be aware of as we're planning projects out there? Chris or Rich, Jennifer?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I don't know specifically what the ratio is, but I would suspect it's pretty even. And it's pretty even just because the priorities don't value one over the other necessarily. I think the reason we hit where we do hit, though, I think one contributing factor could be scarcity of land. You know, we of course do a lot of new construction deals, and our developer partners and public housing authority partners are very good at securing land. And we've got a couple of, one in particular, but a couple of nonprofits out here who have mastered the art of land banking and, you know, really obtained the resources that allow them to do that. So there's a lot going on so that new construction continues to happen. But because it's such a battle and land is so expensive here, I mean, it's incredibly expensive. Our developer partners are very keen on looking at, you know, preservation and rehab opportunities as well. So I think those are the factors that might tend to play into the balance that we see.
Great. Jennifer?
Yeah, I mean, you know, in a good year, we say no to 2 out of 3 projects that come into our consolidated RFP. And in a year where we don't get a big infusion from the legislature, we say no to 3 out of 4 projects that come in the door. You know, I'd like to say yes to 19 out of 20 of the projects that come in the door. So the answer is we need more resources. You know, I think that we've got to be doing more of all of it, because we're losing, you know, so-called naturally occurring affordable housing. You know, it's so important to keep the federally subsidized units in the state, keep that HUD money flowing, but we just need more. You know, we just need more. And so I'm gonna stick with my party line here. And I'm glad you embraced it, Rich.
Totally.
More is better.
We all do.
Yes, more is better.
So, with us, not surprisingly, because of the generational investment we have done in housing, that we are doing in our housing plan, the city's housing plan, 1 out of every 3 units is new construction, 2 are preservation. So we have so many different tools for preservation. It's not so much coming from the bond side, as I mentioned, but we are, you know, through our use of subsidy, real property tax exemptions, and other programs, we've been able to extend affordability at a regular pace. And we're in the middle of a 300,000 unit plan. And we're closing in on 200,000, and during this mayor's administration is 8 years. So for us, I mean, it's a massive investment, and we do continue to do that. And so we have appetite to do essentially everything. As I said, we're not using volume cap on preservation for the last 5 years, partly because the city's capital and HTC's own capital that's gone into deals is enough for us to be able to do new construction at that scale. And that makes us unusual in that we're dedicating really, you know, about $1.25 billion to $1.5 billion of subsidy between our two sources as soft money. And so because that's kind of enormous and kind of crazy, it allows, yeah, I know Jennifer's going, wowee, that is more. We could do it, but if we had even more, it's even better. So, but it is sort of that function of that new costs. I mean, Chris, if you think your land costs and your construction costs are high, at some point I'll go over some pro formas with you, and you'll get to see New York. And by the way, New York is not San Francisco, which is you know, proverbial insane. But anyway, I think we really have an appetite to try to help and work on anything, and we can. And Milt, I really appreciate you pointing out what we've done with the Housing Authority, because that is, I think, kind of an unusual thing. And working with the leveraging of Section 8 and other resources to be able to not use tax credits has been super powerful. And so we're really proud of that. So thank you.
Great, great. So I know whenever I get a chance to meet with agencies individually, I always end the meeting, not that we're ending, to say, what can we do as a developer? And I extend this, what can NH&RA do, the development community do, to help your respective agencies meet their goals? And I know the easy things are build as many housing units as you can for the least amount of money. But other than those obvious things, what else can we do? Just give me, each of you, give me one thing in your state as a clear message to developers out there and other stakeholders.
I'll go, and I'll just repeat what I said before. Let's not turn this into a multifamily versus single family fight. Right. That's a lose-lose proposition. And so help build coalitions so that we can just fight for the resources that are flexible enough to be used in both places, as opposed to viewing it as kind of a win or lose between multifamily and single family. I think that's one. And then I think the other is to help promote a better sophistication around the idea of why costs are what they are. Because it's never one thing, but it gets oversimplified, I think, in the political arena as costs being about one thing. And so I think to develop kind of a sophisticated and accurate narrative around costs and cost containment, that would be really helpful as well.
Great. Tanya?
I think, you know, just to really continue to do the things that at least the developers that work in Georgia do. They really work with us. We try to partner. We try to have a dialogue of, you know, discussion of issues that come up. Just continue that. And before someone, you know, kind of jumps to a conclusion or, is calling the governor or, trying to work it a different way, just talk to us. Because we usually are in a position to adjust and figure it out. And my staff is very open to those conversations. And if the answer is no, if we can't fix it, if it can't happen, then we're going to tell you that pretty upfront. But we're always open for the conversations. And I think that dialogue is really what's important. So anybody who's on this panel, who's listening, if you work in Georgia, just give us a call if you have a question.
Awesome. Well, I know we've got about 10 minutes left, and what would a virtual conference be without a discussion around COVID? That's why we're all at home or in our offices and not down in Florida at our normal location for the annual meeting. So all of your agencies have adapted during this pandemic period. I know when this started, we were in the middle of closing some deals, strangely enough, I think in Georgia. And we were panicking. We were wondering, how are things like documents going to get signed? How are we going to do inspections? How are notaries going to do their work? Each of you just talk, a minute or so about some of the challenges that you faced during this period and how you overcame them.
No, can I ask a favor? I just want to jump in with your prior point. The one other thing that I think the development community can really be helpful on is the point about housing as infrastructure and housing as economic development. I think that you can help with those discussions and that your advocacy coming at it in particular as we try to make this sort of more purpley and not just red versus blue, but to sort of make a business argument for affordable housing, I think you can help with that. And I think it's important to do that. So when people at NH&RA wonder what can they do, the answer is to advocate that way to sort of once again help grow that pie, because I think it will redound to all of our benefit. With respect to COVID, I mean, it has been kind of nutty, and it's impressive. I think, you know, we haven't been in our office for a year, and we, you know, we started being able to close deals pretty quickly. We were able, you know, we had an enormous amount of volume. We issued 2.2 billion of bonds last year. We started, you know, virtual inspections. Being able to review files for people looking to rent apartments became an essential service job. And so we were able to sort of, you know, mount all of the support to be able to move these processes forward, because it was just so important. Home is everything now, more so than ever, right? We realize how important our homes are. And so for all of that, to be able to support that. And then for our advocacy, to advocate for, you know, when, you know, with our borrowers, to advocate for the challenges that they were facing regarding rent, right? That they had tenants who weren't being able to pay. So advocating for the emergency rental assistance programs, which have a lot of challenges, but are tremendously important, to advocate for resources out of Washington and to continue to be able to do that for this area. You know, the interesting thing with Section 8 became gold. It was so easy to adjust. And that was sort of an interesting dynamic. You know, a few years ago, you know, you'd have a Section 8 deal, but what happens if they get rid of Section 8? And the answer is they're not. And that's the good news. So a variety of things, it's just sort of that adjusting. And it's been tedious and challenging, but I'm super proud of our agency and all the agencies and how we all have continued to work on these points because it's so important.
Great. And, you know, tied to COVID, you know, this creates a whole new dynamic for the type of units that we develop as well. So, Chris, have you taken any steps in your QAP or your policies about things that developers should be thinking about, looking at, new designs, new requirements for underwriting, anything like that coming out of Colorado?
Yeah, Milt, not specific to COVID. I mean, that which has been in existence will continue to carry forward. You know, with design standards and healthy living environments and that sort of thing. So the priorities and that sort of thing haven't really changed. The only thing that's changed for us is not relative to, you know, production, but just not as rich as everybody else is experiencing, just working from home. So hopefully we're accomplishing the same things, but even from home. But again, Milt, no, nothing particularly in that regard. Now, the one thing I have seen a little bit, we've done quite a bit of transactions over the years and been a big sort of investor in models for healthy living environments and permanent supportive housing and that sort of thing. The COVID impact on that is causing a little bit of a rethink to what healthy housing means. But it hasn't changed anything with respect to our QAP or that sort of thing. Good.
Jennifer, I recall you had a background in healthcare.
Yeah, that's why I kind of try to slip past all those volume cap and 4% questions. My background is healthcare policy and healthcare finance, but I think a couple things I guess I'd say. One is it's extraordinary how the work has continued in this environment, and whether that's our partners who are just continuing to do unglamorous groundbreakings and unglamorous grand openings, or it's just getting deals closed. And you know, I think we sold bonds today. You know, it's just that it just continues to happen to me is kind of amazing. I haven't been in my office since March 16th of last year. I think what's happening here is that, you know, COVID exposed the importance of housing to health in a way that many of us have known for a long time, but it just really has shown such a bright light on it. And then being the place where George Floyd was murdered has forced Minnesota to talk about race in a way that we historically have not been comfortable doing. And it's forcing really a conversation that is happening really, to me, critically and importantly, but at a warp speed of acceleration, which I'm excited to be, I'm excited to be on that ride. But the intersectionality between COVID, public health, the history and present racial discrimination, I was want to say history and present racial discrimination in housing, and and also the conversation around homelessness. And we got more one-time federal homeless money kind of pushed into our systems through the stimulus money, but the problem doesn't go away. So one of the things that I'd like to see is a national conversation about the capitalization of shelter. And when you have people sleeping head to toe on the floor, and you get a pandemic, like that don't work. And so this whole question of okay, so we've created all these different types of spaces. It's fun to see the home money in the proposed stimulus that passed the House that could be used for purchase of some of these spaces. But we just need a rational conversation about the capitalization and operating costs of shelter as well. And that wouldn't necessarily come through my housing finance agency, but it's the other part of the continuum here. And it's the other part that, we say that, COVID kind of stopped the music and everybody sat down, and a problem that's been growing here just suddenly became a lot more visible. And, and there's no place where public health kind of racism and housing intersects more than in people who are living outside.
Thanks, Jennifer. So of course we would also be remiss if we didn't talk about what is each of your agencies doing around diversity, equity, and inclusion in your programs, either staff level or interaction with the public or even with developers. And each of you take a minute and just talk about that for a second.
Sure, I'll go ahead and jump in on that. I was just going to say on the healthy living conversation, we've always had that as part of our QAP and part of what developers are encouraged to do. But at DCA, we're responsible for actually all of the affordable housing across the state. So we do everything from Section 8 to the homeless side to single family to LIHTC, you name it. We're responsible for all of the programs. And I just wanted to say, I do agree with Jennifer that it's a good discussion to have, and it's good. It's easier for us because we've got all those pieces under one roof, if you will. And we are starting to have more of those conversations, especially as more of the stimulus money continues to flow in. How can we do more with this money and then shift something else a little bit differently, do something differently? So I'm definitely excited about that. In terms of equity and inclusion, I would just say from Georgia's perspective, you probably haven't seen as much, MBE or WBE requirements or certification, over the years, but we're definitely looking to include more of that and to require more of that. So that might be something that's a little bit new for the developers to hear, and that's on the deals, also in our construction trades, our professional partners, all of that, because we really do want to grow more talent and kind of bring along those who are more interested in participating in the development process. So that's something that we're actively looking to enhance in our 2022 QAP process.
Awesome.
Which happens like right now, we're talking about it. So you'll hear it in listening sessions, et cetera.
Great. Chris?
Yeah, thanks, Milt. About 10 years ago, we formally introduced our diversity and inclusion initiative, put 100% of staff and our entire board through D&I education so they could define it, knew what it meant, knew the value of it, understood that it was the right thing to do and that there was a business case for doing it. In the last year, we've incorporated the equity component into our initiative. So now it's the diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative. And the way we've tried to implement that and have that influence our operations is looking at things through an equity lens. and understanding that one size fits all solution is not the way forward. You have to engage with the communities in which you're operating and understand what the needs of those communities are, understand historical biases that might be present in those communities, and understand ways to get beyond that in ways that meet that particular community's needs. And I think the industry is good at this and needs to continue to be brave to identify those communities and name those communities in those operations. Because if you're not clear about who you're trying to serve and what hurdles you're trying to overcome, it's harder to get those hurdles. It's harder to overcome those hurdles. So we found it to be very, very, it's great for morale, our DEI initiatives, and it's great for business. We exist only to fulfill our mission. That's the only reason this organization exists, is to fulfill its mission. And the only way we can do that to the greatest maximum extent possible is to operate through a DEI lens. That way we're hitting more communities, the most communities we possibly can, and we're fulfilling our mission in the greatest way possible.
Awesome. Rich, I don't know if you want to add some commentary there.
You know, I was just going to say, I mean, Chris did a great job of explaining that, and I think that we approach that as well. And I think because of the sort of inherent nature and what DHFAs do to serve low-income people, it's somewhat self-evident. But I think we do need to have more intention and purpose in that, and so I think that is definitely a bigger part of it. And I think as you communicate it both internally and externally, that you really do approach everything from that broader lens, and especially from a community impression as well, that you're engaging with the community and that people understand what you're trying to do. It's tremendously important, and I think that the world is sort of catching up to some of the things that we're doing, and I think we're continuing to evolve. So it's exciting and tremendously important.
I think evolution is the right word when you said you continue to evolve, because organizations across this industry, they didn't all have it right, and that's okay. But they've acknowledged that. They figured out new ways to do business. They figured out that this is, as you said, Chris, this makes for a good business case. Tom and I have been talking about the NH&RA forming a DE&I committee, and we're making some progress. Our organization has been doing the same thing. And I think, you know, there's other developers out there and financiers. I know Mark McDaniels at Scenair, they've had a great program. I remember he was at one of our conferences a few years ago and talked about their program. So it's good that it's getting some traction. I think we have 10 minutes, Tom, or are we right up against our time?
We're right up on time, unfortunately.
All right. I was going to ask one last question, but I'll hold it, which was, what's the top challenge for each of your agencies? Tom, can I ask each of them to say one word, just one simple word? What's your top challenge for 2020? Go. Rich, one word.
More.
Jennifer?
I'm going to say racial equity, because if I just say equity, it might just sound like more, but I'm going to say racial equity. But I'll say it fast, and then it's like one word.
Tanya?
I don't know. It feels like there are a lot, but I'm going to say, you know, more efficient use of the more, and you know, more collaboration across all of our programs.
And Chris?
Resources, PAB.
Great. Thank you. I'm going to say more is better. I'm going to adopt Jennifer's slogan. I think
it's Rich's improvement in my slogan.
Thank you. I want to thank my fellow panelists. This has been a great discussion and dialogue about challenges that face our community, our development community. It's important to note that you are our partners in every way. So please continue to let us know what we're doing great, what we're not doing, and how we can fix it, because all of us have the same common goal. And my personal slogan is always the same: residents first and real estate second. And you make those decisions in that priority, you always seem to do okay. And you folks are the ones that help all of us as developers do those things, take care of our residents in the real estate. Tom, I'm gonna turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Milt. And that was a wonderful panel. As I really appreciate all of your participation and support and leadership. We are going to take about a 1 minute break to queue up our poll and to get the next panel set. So don't go far. We're about to transition to our next, our next session.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the quick turnaround. I just wanted to make a quick observation about a few of the questions that were posed in the last panel, and then I'm going to introduce our next discussion. But we were able to get to, I think, just about all the major themes in the questions that were posed in some way, shape, or form, although I think that we'll definitely want to extend the conversation on efficiency measures and QAPs to deal with limited resources. There were a number of questions around that. And there was a question about the role of the $15 minimum wage, if that moves forward on affordability. And I think that's a great question that we'll hopefully address in some greater detail at the NACAMA meeting coming up in next month. So with that, I'd like to get our next session queued up. And I'm going to do a little bit of framing before I introduce our panelists. As we close today's discussion, we wanted to do something a little bit different. And I think this is going to be really enjoyable and a little bit of a departure from a typical NH&RA session. But I wanted to start by acknowledging that the past year has been very traumatic for really everybody in our country, but particularly for our colleagues serving on the front lines, providing care and services for the public. So this is in part a salute to all of our colleagues in property management, leasing, maintenance, resident services, and construction that are out there, again, on the front lines. And even those of us who have the luxury of working from home, as I am today, many of us have lost friends and family and colleagues to the pandemic. And we may also be providing a different sort of care, whether it's for children or family members or others in the community. So it's fair to say that we've all taken a lot on our shoulders and experienced in some way, shape, or form some varying degree of stress and trauma. And our closing session today is going to host a discussion on how contemplative-based resilience can be another tool in your toolbox to support the well-being of obviously yourself and those who work in your organization. I'm really pleased to introduce Lena Pasquale, who's the director of the Contemplative-Based Resilience Project at the Garrison Institute, who's going to walk us through some of the resources that fine organization has developed to support caregivers, along with Jonathan Rose and Carolyn Berry of the Jonathan Rose Companies. And they're going to speak to how they've utilized some of these tools to strengthen the resiliency of their team members through this extended crisis. And I was just thinking back to a mere year ago today on our very first town hall, which Jonathan joined us on we've done, I think, 36 virtual events since then, and it's been quite a journey. But Jonathan was there right at the beginning, so I wanted to tip my hat to you. But I think everyone's going to really enjoy this discussion, and I'm going to step out of the way so we can have it. So thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Tom. And it's such a pleasure to be here today. And, you know, one of the things, actually, this is an internal message to our presenting team. Maybe we'll condense the part we do in the beginning a little more so that after Lena does her presentation, we can have some questions or conversation with the audience, because that probably would be really helpful. So I just want to frame this really simply. And Tom, you did a great job of it about the personal stresses we've been through. I just want to note that also for our employees and our residents, we've not only seen the impacts of COVID-19, we've seen the attendant increase in unemployment, which has put a lot of stress on our residents and also put stress on them. Our employees have to deal with that. We've had rent collection issues. We've seen the emergence of Black Lives Matters, which has simply shined a spotlight on an issue that was already pre-existing. Many of us went through, no matter which side you were on, a highly emotional and stress and traumatizing, actually, election, a very divisive one and an emotional one for many, and that our community housing budgets have been affected by, you know, we're in a recession, and that always affects the abilities of agencies who now have even more things to deal with, and in many cases, less resources. So this has been an extraordinarily stressful time. And so what we wanted to do today is Caroline's going to talk to you briefly about how we began to bring meditation or contemplative-based programs into our company and the benefit of that. And then Lena's going to present a short version, a very short version of what could be a longer course that is designed specifically for frontline workers, for the people such as our staff who are in the front lines of dealing with all the stresses and traumas of our residents. And we're also, as part of that, Lena's going to give you access to a free app, which we encourage you to distribute to all of your employees and even your residents if you want, but it's really designed for the employees to help them through this stressful period. All right, thank you.
Great, and I'll speak for a moment about how we have made this a practice at our own organization. So at Jonathan Rowe's companies, for many years, we've been practicing meditation before we start each meeting. And also in the retreats that we've taken, some of them have been focused on the notion of meditation, the benefits of it, both from a physical health perspective as well as a mental health perspective. So by doing that within our offices, it basically gives each person the ability to start a meeting and say, I think we need a moment of silence. And in our very busy worlds and busy days, that is a much needed moment to take a breath, to find our presence in the meeting and to focus on the meeting at hand versus feeling like you're bringing the stresses of your day, your world, or the last meeting with you. So it's been very rewarding. And as mentioned, although we've been doing it for years within our corporate office, more recently, as we've expanded our business to include a property management firm, we've brought those practices to the property management firm. So when we're meeting with our regionals, with our community managers, with our facilities managers, and Jonathan, I can let you speak to this, but I know that you've received so many comments of thanks from that wider team of individuals. So yes, you're shaking your head. Yes, they do thank you for bringing the practice, and they say how helpful it is to them in their days at the properties, which are probably far more hectic than what we all experience in our office worlds.
Yes. So thank you, Caroline. So Lena, let's show them what we do.
Great. So this contemplative-based resilience project actually began many years ago. It was co-founded by Deanna Rose, Jonathan's wife, and Sharon Salzberg, leading meditation teacher and New York Times bestselling author. And both of them really thought about the need for care for caregivers. And really, I'll say all of us in that aspect, particularly now through the multiplicity of the stressors Jonathan, as you described, Tom, as you described, and just a little bit that I heard even coming on board this webinar a little earlier, the multiplicity of those stressors and the importance for all of us to pay attention to what's happening. And the Contemplative-Based Resilience Project really focuses on that resilience can be learned. Resilience is not stagnant, but rather contemplative tools such as mindfulness, meditation, compassion for self and other, and also movement practices can help us reinforce our individual and collective resilience. So the CBR project is framed through 3 pillars: awareness, balance, and connection. And through those 3 pillars, we include psychosocial education and awareness around the impact of stress and how it's manifesting in our hearts, in our bodies, in our mind, and recognizing it, and then transforming that into resilience. How do we then take that information and utilize it for our own personal well-being and community well-being? And guess what helps? Contemplative tools. So awareness, balance, and connection, psychosocial, meditation, mindfulness, and also body practices, because as we know, our bodies also, if you will, keep score onto that stress. So the Contemplative-Based Resilience Project, right now, we've been implementing and shifting into a virtual world, and we're really excited because we have a much far greater reach, and we're able to do live hosting of CBR to so many more. And one of the additions that we had this year is the Care for Caregivers app, which you have a link to that in your book, in your workbook for the meeting today. And also I'll share a link with Sarah so she can share it with all of you. But this app actually includes 8 practices that reinforce awareness, balance, and connection. And the beauty of the practices in this app is that they're short and sweet, 5 to 6 minutes long, recognizing that in the hustle and bustle of everything people have to do and the stress of just the day, sometimes we can't afford to have more than 5 or 6 minutes. But Sharon Salzberg and Gayla Marie Stiles, they offer us 8 different opportunities to engage in moments of presence of mind, presence of breath, and presence of body. So today we're actually going to practice one of these meditations to give you a sampling of what's available in the app. And I would like to say the app is very user-friendly. You download it and press play on one of the 8 and you're good to go. Took out all of that jargon of signing up, emails, this, that, and the third. Really wanted to make it accessible and available for everyone to use so that individuals and communities together can begin on the road to activating stronger resilience through contemplation. So that's the CBR project.
Are you going to show us, take us through an app?
I think Brooke is going to cue it up. So Brooke, can you pause it just for 1 second, Brooke? Okay, so I wanted to just frame this. So this is one of the practices. It's about 5 minutes long, and it's entitled Centering on Breath. And it's facilitated by Sharon Salzberg. And as you participate in this practice, we really invite you in as much as possible to just take these 5 minutes and focus on only yourself. Try to remove the distractions around you, what you have to do in 15 minutes from now, and really just hone in and give yourself that opportunity for self-reflection for these 5 minutes. Take it away, Brooke.
In this meditation, we're going to practice resting our attention on the feeling of the breath in order to get more centered. Sometimes when there's like really crazy momentum going on around us or a lot of pressure, a lot of difficulty, what we need more than anything is just to pause, step back for a moment, take a breath, return to ourselves, return in that moment to what we really care about, and then go on. So we're going to do a concentration exercise together, utilizing the breath as that means of stepping back and getting some space. Now, the breath doesn't work for everybody. There may be physical reasons or emotional reasons why it's not really working for you as a meditative object, and that's fine. You can just choose something else in your body, some other sensation that's actually happening already. Okay, so let's begin. You can sit comfortably. You don't have to get into some weird pretzel-like pose. Just be comfortable. You can close your eyes or not, however you feel most at ease. To begin with, we're actually going to do a conscious style of breathing, because research tells us that if your out breath is longer than your in breath, then the sympathetic nervous system, which is governing fight or flight, will switch over to the parasympathetic nervous system, and your whole being will just kind of chill. Okay, so let's breathe in, let's say for the count of 2, and then breathe out for the count of 4. And if that doesn't work for the rhythm of your breath, you can just switch it according to that principle. And then let your breath become natural, however it's appearing. And see if you can find the place where the breath is clearest for you or strongest for you. Maybe that's the nostrils, or the chest, or the abdomen. You find that place, bring your attention there, and just rest. See if you can feel one breath without concern for what's already gone by, without leaning forward for even the very next breath, just this one. And if images or sounds or sensations or emotions are arising, but they're not all that strong, if you can stay connected to the feeling of the breath, just let them flow on by. You're breathing. It's just one breath. If something comes up with a bang and it pulls you away, you get lost in thought, spun out in a fantasy, or you fall asleep. Truly, don't worry about it. We say the most important moment is the next moment after you've been gone, after you've been lost. Because we have the chance in that moment to let go gently and begin again with a full heart. We let go of whatever and just bring our attention back to the feeling of the breath. No blame, no judgment. And when you feel ready, you can open your eyes or lift your gaze, and we'll end the meditation session.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you all for participating in this practice.
Thank you so much, Lena. Beautifully done. So my question is, we have a little more time. Tom, are we able to have the audience ask either Caroline or Lena questions?
Yes, absolutely. Want to direct people to the Q&A box. We've already gotten a couple of thank yous in the chat as well for hosting this session, which I find very validating. It looks like as of now, we don't have a question in here, but I guess I wanted to ask Carolyn or Jonathan, obviously this has been a part of your kind of corporate culture as you described. How do you introduce the idea of this contemplative practice to a new employee maybe that's not already embraced the corporate culture, and how does that work within your teams?
Caroline, do you want
to? Sure. I mean, it's so deeply embedded in our culture. By the time they show up for work the first day, they are exposed to the practice because we begin so many meetings this way. But I also think as we're interviewing individuals, they get a sense of our company culture, and we want to make sure that it's a company culture that they're attracted to. So I think they have a good sense of what they're entering into as they come. Jonathan, you may want to add to that.
So I've been meditating for many decades now, and one of the things that I am very conscious of is the boss pushing what they love to do, or their religion, or their beliefs, or anything. And so I would say I was pushed to the employees who kept saying, why don't you share with us what you're doing? So like I felt very reluctant actually to promote meditation within the business. So in some ways it was employees that said, hey, you're holding out on us. Why are you holding out? Why don't you share with us something that's working for you? And then, so what's interesting is, for example, in our corporate headquarters, we have a practice of starting every meeting with a minute of silence, and our meetings are intense. It's not like we're all zoned out and meditating all day at work. And so when you run into, like it's been a pretty intense meeting, you go to the next meeting, it's very helpful to not bring the intensity to the last meeting. So what we found is all of a sudden, people outside the corporate office saying, so we don't deserve a minute of silence?
No.
So it's really been the opposite of which our people have been asking for more and more of it because it feels so good.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we have some questions in here now. Oh, so please feel free to others to respond to that too, but I can queue up some of the questions also if you're.
I just wanted to say, Jonathan, as you were speaking, I thought about just what Sharon said, non-judgmental. You engage in this process by inviting people in and having a non-judgmental culture in terms of what may or may not work for others, and providing a menu of different things, which is really the beauty of the CBR project, because it does just that. It provides a menu of different practices from a non-judgmental point of view. And hopefully something will take hold for people and they will begin the journey.
So one of the questions here is about sort of the app utilization. So how well it is used. And I'm curious sort of what, obviously it's being used in the context of affordable housing, but where are you seeing it used? And if you're collecting any user data from it, curious what sort of impact you might be seeing from it, Lena.
I think it just launched in late January, so keep that in mind. But we are seeing use of it within direct social service organizations in particular, and also the healthcare field. In fact, this morning I did a 1-hour introduction to Miriam Hospital in Rhode Island to their nurses, and they're using the app. They've actually posted it in their intranet as part of daily access for them to engage in the app and the practices. So we're seeing really a wide scope implementation with the app, and we're increasingly distributing the link. We have it on our website, and it's incorporated directly into the CBR training as well as part of the live workshops, but then also, more importantly, as a continuation to reinforce the contemplative tools upon finishing with us as part of the CBR project.
Another question here, which I didn't quite address, but we conceived of it anyway, but have you considered introducing the apps and the practice to your residents, perhaps as part of a resident service program? And if so, how is that working?
I'm so glad somebody asked that because I meant to include it in my opening statements. So as we've brought it now to our property management firm, our next step is to hopefully bring it to our residents. And, as Jonathan described how it was brought to our company, in the same way, we would bring it to our residents only as they've shown interest. A lot of times, well, I should say in all cases, when we purchase a property or open up a property, we do a survey of sorts of what the residents are interested in. And we do get a lot of commentary about yoga and wellness programming and meditative practices. So we would like to roll this app out because we think particularly during COVID, when we can't do the one-on-one sessions that we so often do at our properties, it's a way to make the practice available to our residents. The other forum within our residential community would be, as we meet with our resident community groups, when we're talking about the property on a weekly basis and business matters, being able to open those meetings with a moment of silence, I think would probably be beneficial for all of us as participants. So that is part of our plan as we move forward.
Another question that came in, I think, is more sort of on your individual personal practices, but the questioner was asking when you find it to be the most effective time to meditate, in addition to the moment of silence, I guess, in between meetings, if you're morning or throughout the day, or, I guess, and it could be in the context of the 5-minute tool or your deeper practices.
For me, it's first thing in the morning, and a strong recommendation that goes with it, which is do not look at your email before you meditate. Because if you do, then you're going to be meditating on your email. And I find it hard enough to keep as Sharon said, the most important thing you do is when you is recognize your mind is going to wander, and then when you bring it back. And so anyway, Lena, what about you?
For me, what's really important are those ordinary moments. So I try to really build in mindfulness practices throughout the day. As I'm waking up in the morning and getting dressed, can I use that opportunity for 1 or 2 minutes to center my breath, center myself? As I'm getting in the car and putting the key in the ignition, or even as I'm preparing to check all my emails and respond to emails, those ordinary moments are really important to me, because my practice also is typically early in the morning as well, but I also enjoy the outdoors. So I do a lot of physical meditation practices. And as we've embarked into the winter and it's been a little bit more difficult for me to do that, these ordinary moments have been really critical in order for my own personal reinforcement of mindfulness and meditation.
And then Lena, I've been getting Garrison Institute emails for a number of years now, and I'm really just blown away by the breadth of courses and training and retreats that the organization offers. And I'm just curious how our members can work beyond using the app, how our members that might be interested in pursuing this further, what sort of opportunities might they have to work with the Garrison Institute to support their teams?
Great. So right now we have a 3-part workshop series. It's actually framed through awareness, balance, and connection. So that's 3 distinct workshops. They're about 2 hours each. And in addition, what we've done is we've coupled that with what we call cohort coaching, because we recognize having a teacher directly working with individuals on a more consistent basis to deepen the material from CBR is really important. And it was really our way to try to modify what was a typical 3 or 4 day retreat into a more direct service-oriented approach through CBR, through the virtual realm. So those are all live hosted with CBR faculty And they're all framed through awareness, balance, and connection, and include what I opened up with, the psychosocial aspects of stress and building wellness plans, and then also meditation, mindfulness, and love and kindness and compassion for self and others as part of that. And you can contact me. You have my information in the brochure, and please reach out. We would love to work with you.
Well, we are unfortunately coming up to our time, and I know that want to keep us on track from a schedule, but I thought that last discussion and really the whole day was really well, exceeded my expectations. I hope everybody certainly feels a little more centered as you prepare for the rest of your day after our meditation just now. Just sharing on a personal note, I downloaded the app as soon as I learned about it, and I've been using it. I'd actually been using the Fitbit meditations in the Fitbit app prior to that, and had found them really helpful. But just a little fun fact, yesterday, my 7-year-old was having a pretty tough day with virtual school. And we actually sat down and did the meditation that we actually just demoed a few minutes ago together. And it really actually helped him quite a bit also. And I felt like a super dad coming out of it. So, nice. Thank you. Thank you for that. This is the end of our first day of programming. I hope everybody had a great experience. We're going to launch one more poll just for some additional feedback. And then we will be returning tomorrow at 1 o'clock Eastern. I wanted to thank again all of our sponsors and speakers today for a really thoughtful program. And if you enjoyed in particular this last discussion, I just wanted to put in a plug. We had a really great discussion last week as we came together for one of our Unmute the Mic town halls on supporting the health and well-being of employees and residents as the pandemic extends. And anybody that's interested in seeing that, we're happy to make the replay available. So until 1 o'clock tomorrow, I hope you have a fantastic rest of the day, and we look forward to exploring some more great issues tomorrow afternoon. Thank you.